Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the stream. Hello. We've got a special
Oh,
guest here today.
hello, hello, hello.
You want to introduce yourself, special guest?
Yes, hello, I'm Myelin Aikman. I'm part of Gen 1.5 of V-Theorem. I do streams and videos about psychology and anime and statistics.
Yeah, and I brought Myelin on because I need help with the statistics of this paper because I am bad at that.
No.
Hello, I'll start off by just saying hello to everyone real quick. Hello, Platinum Buddy and Wibbles. Welcome, welcome. Hello. Ian's, Anez, how do you say your name? Surprise Pants, welcome. Dreamless Sleep, hello. Hello, Hair Day, welcome. Hello, Joel and Marlin, welcome, welcome. Astral, Nicholas, Pedro, welcome, welcome. Archie, welcome. Ludi, hello. Gabrielle, welcome, welcome. Otto, hello, hello, hello. Okay, so we've got a couple of people who have commented with their favorite alcoholic drinks, and I'll address that all, and when we get a couple of slides deep. But yeah, I am a part of Water Gang. Water on the Rocks I saw in chat, which is very funny. And so yeah, we'll talk about this paper, which is really, really interesting. You can find the paper linked in the channel description, actually. And so we're here to talk about whether or not drinking alcohol can be actually kind of good for you based on a post I saw in Our Science the other day. Of course, my favorite source of science information. Certainly very reputable source where you learn things that are definitely true. But we're going to be talking a little bit more about the paper. We're going to be talking about how you can actually navigate reading something that you don't agree with, but you also have no expertise in, because this is kind of a special situation I think is really, really, really fun to delve into. Okay, so in terms of the impact statement of this paper, it's alcohol bad, but what if alcohol good sometimes? So so I don't really, it's a pretty easy thing to understand in terms of the scope that we're talking about. And so the research question here is specifically having to do with someone's lipid profiles, right? So the levels of good and bad fats in the blood. So the paper is addressing this particular question. What effect does starting or stopping alcohol consumption have on those lipid levels? All right. So we have an agenda here. We are first going to do an activity where we all check our bias. This is something that I do every time I cover something health related because it is potentially polarizing. And then a background check just to be very straightforward and upfront about where my expertise starts and ends. And then we'll actually talk about the paper and a little bit about LDL and HDL as a background. And then we'll talk about kind of the state of science communication with regards to at least some aspects of health communication, which I think is going to be pretty interesting. And then we'll just kind of hang out until Myelin has to go. All right. So first, I want to talk about my biases. And I think this would actually be a really good opportunity for chat to also take part in this activity, because while it's really fun to watch people dunk on each other in the science space, people claiming that people are making decisions based on their emotions and not rationally. The problem with that is that our human brains did not evolve to act logically. I like to say the human brain evolved to act rationally. So rational as opposed to logical. The way that I'm using the word rational, it just means that your brain evolved to act upon making connections and having reasons. Now, whether or not those reasons are connected in an airtight chain, that's oftentimes not true, right? So we are not these infallible logic machines. We are scraping by the skin of our teeth, evolutionarily speaking. All right. So to mitigate the effect of any existing feelings, it's important to just say them out loud, just so that you yourself are aware how much stake you have in a certain topic. So I'll go first. So I drink 0 to 1 drinks a month. Down from my all-time high of 2 drinks a month. So I am a very, very light drinker, and I pretty much don't drink anymore just because I'm of age. I'm of the age where hangovers really hurt. So there's plenty of deterrents that prevent me from drinking more than this. My favorite alcoholic drink is a cheap watered down margarita. The thing is that a margarita is sugary, it's salty, it's fruity, and then the little bit of alcohol from having a really dilute margarita just rounds out the taste of sugar. And I come from a culture where a common praise for desserts is, oh, it's not too sweet. If you know, you know. My existing belief is that alcohol is basically poison, and I hold this belief pretty strongly. So when I saw this headline that alcohol consumption was capable of lowering your bad cholesterol levels, that was, I had an emotional reaction, right? I'm like, oh God, not this again. This is obviously nonsense bunk. But to be a good scientific citizen, you should entertain ideas that you don't agree with too. So to check my bias, I will be providing a generous read, then evaluating whether I believe my own generous read. All right. Okay. So, Myelin, do you want to do this bias check too, if you're comfortable with sharing?
Sure, sure. I have never had a drop of alcohol in my life. My favorite pseudo-alcoholic drink is a Shirley Temple.
Very nice.
My existing belief is that it is also basically that alcohol is basically poison, but who am I to judge when I drink other such things? And I'm just here for the stats.
Yeah, Mylin's here to chill and sort of
I'm just hanging out.
For me to bounce ideas off of, because this is such an interesting and complicated topic outside of the paper. And it looks like we also had Clockwork show up. Hello, Clockwork. Welcome.
Hello.
All right. So, yeah, so I'll say this. When I read the headline, unlike the previous papers I've covered, right? So, like, you know, I did a paper on vaping that Reddit overreacted to. I did a paper on aspartame that Reddit also overreacted to. But in terms of vaping and aspartame, I, like, have no horse in that race, right? Like, vaping, as someone with, like, as someone that has a level of anxiety that is... I feel like I manage my anxiety quite well, but I'm on the anxious side of humanity. I'll put it that way. The appeal of, like, you know, marijuana or vaping and that, you know, that never appealed to me, just because I feel like I would be really, really into it. And that to me is dangerous. And so, you know, whether or not that's harmful or not, I don't really care. But alcohol is something that is so normalized by our culture that, you know, drink or don't drink, you probably have an opinion on the health effects of alcohol. And so this is a really interesting opportunity to talk about how I read a paper that I did not agree with and how I navigated that emotional, intellectual situation. All right. So here's the first thing that I want to make clear to chat. When you are reading, especially when you are reading a paper whose conclusions you disagree with, it is really, really important to use what I'm calling the convincing paradigm, right? So in terms of a lot of internet beef, you get a lot of people going like, you're wrong, you know, or, you know, your sources are blah. And people are not interested in having a conversation. What they really want to do on the internet is be right. And, you know, it's human nature, you know, it happens. In order to cultivate a state of mind where you are open-minded and yet firm in your ideals and your existing beliefs, instead of saying you are wrong, we should be talking about whether or not an argument is convincing, right? So you'll actually see this a lot in in communications by scientists when we're talking about, like, essentially the the equivalent of, like, quote tweeting, right, on papers where there's, like, responses in journals and stuff like that. So those scientists won't actually, like, attack each other by saying, like, oh, you're wrong or whatever, but they'll say that arguments are not convincing. And so what this allows you to do, allows you to operate in a space where you are allowing yourself to eventually be wrong, right? It's not that you are taking a principled stance on the truth of the matter. It is that you are constantly updating your understanding of the world. And if there is a convincing argument, it allows you, you know, like, mentally to accept those changes. Whereas if you couch yourself in language of you're right, I'm right, you're wrong, that makes you a little more hard-headed, right? And so this is not to say that adapting this style of communication will prevent bad faith arguments, right? Like, you can still have bad faith. It's just that if you, my audience, want to make sure your mind remains cognitively flexible enough to deal with information you don't agree with. Using the language of convincing and not convincing is really, really important, I think. Do you have any thoughts on that, Myelin?
I think that's a very good way of thinking about it. I had not heard of this paradigm before, but I agree, because this leaves open the possibility that you could be convinced in the future. So it prevents you from talking yourself out of believing something that may be true just because the evidence isn't strong enough right now. I don't know. I like it. I like the framing a lot.
Yeah, and I want to make it very clear that I'm not like both sidesing things, right? I'm not out here being like you gotta entertain flat Earth or whatever, right? But in terms of like if you are in the depths of research, you know, and there are controversial findings, this allows you to take what is maybe true about controversial findings and discard what is not true about controversial findings, right? It's just a way to remain flexible and make sure that you don't get left behind the dust when it comes to the next scientific paradigm shift, right? Like, this is an important thing for actual career scientists to be able to do, because once your pet idea has been proven wrong, it's usually not a good idea to continue to pursue it, right? So it is a professional interest to be able to remain flexible and on the right side of science. Okay. So, all right. So background check. Not a doctor. This is not medical advice. Nothing in this stream is medical advice. And you'll actually see how I carefully word my analysis to not be medical advice. I'm not an epidemiologist, so I have no formal training in how diseases spread or how diseases occur, frequency of diseases, all the statistics that goes into that kind of thing. I'm not a statistician, not even close. That's why I have Myelin here, because I look at statistics and go, yeah, sure, why not? I'm a molecular biologist with a focus on neuroimmunology. So I am very much not qualified to talk about what you should do after reading this paper. But that actually makes me good at telling you how you can read information that you're not an expert in and manage your lack of expertise, right? I'm not saying that if you watch this stream that you can operate in a way where you don't have to talk to your doctor. In fact, the very opposite. This allows you to properly define your knowledge base so that you can ask your doctor important and interesting questions, right? So this is not a replacement for talking to an expert. This is supposed to enhance your ability to talk to an expert. All right. Myelin, do you want to do a background check real quick?
Sure. I am a doctor, but not remotely any kind of medical doctor, even in... not that kind of doctor. Definitely not an epidemiologist. I wouldn't consider myself a statistician, though I am fairly good with stats. I am a social psychologist, so anything related to biology in this paper, I'm just... don't... I'm just here for the numbers.
And like we're working together. Neither of us, you know, we don't have an epidemiologist or a doctor in V theorem, but we're working together to try to figure this out. Med school student here. I'll verify everything you say with perfect accuracy. Good to know. Good to know. All right. All right.
The jargon's working.
The jargon is working. Yeah, but there's not a lot of jargon in this paper. It's just LDL and HDL. All right, so why listen to me? Again, the purpose of this exercise is to model how to navigate confusing information as a non-expert, right? And everybody has their own level of buy-in, right? Effort you want to put into research. If you don't want to think about anything, just listen to your doctor, dude. Like, if you don't want to like do the heavy lifting of reading a thing, just listen to your doctor. That's really all you gotta do. But if you are interested in having more autonomy over, or a deeper understanding of what goes into health, then you gotta do some reasonable reading and also listen to your doctor again. And so what this stream is meant to model is how to do this reasonable reading. All right. So what is LDL? What is HDL? I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but essentially you have two types of lipoprotein in the blood. One is HDL, high density lipoprotein. This is just fats that are good for you. They help you remove cholesterol. And then there's LDL, low density lipoprotein. These fats can aggregate into plaques, which can clog your arteries. I'm not a doctor, so I don't really know a lot about how this works. But just you can shorthand it by going, okay, HDL, that's good. LDL, that's bad. I'm actually going to remake the... Oh, it's because I didn't hit the save button on Stream Elements. Okay. Okay, now the command should be working. Sorry. That's so... Yeah, my bad. It should be working now. Okay, cool. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, there aren't that many commands, although you can grab the Discord link using that command. All right. So that brings us to this paper, which is titled Lipid Profiles After Changes in Alcohol Consumption Amongst Adults Undergoing Annual Checkups. And so this is a paper that was led by Harvard researchers, but was completed in Japan. And also, this is a very recent paper, so this is why this is another one of these emergency things. It came out on March 12th, and it's gotten a little bit of heat on Reddit. And so we'll assess whether or not we agree with the Reddit comments, which you can find actually in the video description. All right, so let's talk about the methods here. So health checkups are compulsory in Japan for full-time workers. So if you are a full-time employee, you have to have an annual health checkup, which allows for the collection of data that is not the same in the US, right? Like the fact that you can have such comprehensive data is actually really interesting. And so that's a positive thing for this paper. Data was compiled from 300,000 checkups across 50,000 patients. Not all of the data was used, so I believe this is what ends up being analyzed. A lot of other patient data had to be discarded, either because that data wasn't complete or that they were already on high cholesterol like medication. There are reasons why those patients were not included here. But these are like reasonably managed cholesterol people. You can think of them like that. Okay. The patient pools were split between two cohorts. So after these checkups, there were broadly two categories of patients that we're interested in. People that started drinking more and people who started drinking less, right? So cohort 1 is alcohol initiation, cohort 2 is alcohol cessation. I don't really know if there's like a third cohort where they drank exactly the same between first and second checkup. I think they probably were not analyzed here because, you know, not interesting for the research question. And then the visits were classified in several ways. So alcohol initiation visits, this means that the patient started drinking since the last visit. No alcohol initiation visits, so they stopped. They continued to not drink, I mean. Alcohol cessation visits, so they stopped drinking since last visit, or alcohol continued visits, they continued drinking, right? So you have time point A, which is the first checkup, at time point B, either you decreased your amount that you drank or you increased the amount that you drank. That's kind of how they split these patients here. All right. And then, so during these checkups, LDL and HDL were measured. Again, LDL being the bad fat and HDL being the good fat. In order to analyze this data and have it have meaning, the authors ruled out, or not ruled out, but listed a couple of covariables that they were able to collect from this patient data, including age, sex, medical history, diet, smoking, and exercise, right? All of these factors influence cholesterol levels in some way or another, right? So it's important that you list these covariables so that you can control for them. And actually, Myelin taught me last night what it actually meant for a covariable to be controlled for. So I'm very thankful for that, because when in a paper, when they say they controlled for X, Y, and Z, I'm just like, yeah, sure. But then I never really like thought about what that actually meant. And so taking those covariables, the authors used 3 separate statistical models that allowed them to control for certain covariates. So in model 1, you have age, sex, BMI. Model 2 is model 1 plus hypertension, so blood pressure, diabetes, whether or not you have diabetes, and diet, so whether or not you're eating a lot of sugary or fatty foods, et cetera, et cetera. And then model 3 is basically model 2 plus smoking, your level of exercise. So before I go on, Myelin, do you want to talk about what it actually means for a covariable to be controlled for? Because I've always just shorthanded that in my brain.
Yeah, sure. So, when you're controlling for a variable, you're essentially sort of factoring out variance explained by that variable. So let's say I don't actually know how any of these things relate to cholesterol. But let's say I know that age is related to cholesterol. I might say, okay, as you get older, does your cholesterol get worse? Whatever it is. I know that this is a relationship, but it's not what I care about here. I only care about alcohol. But I also know that maybe as you grow older, you start drinking more, or maybe as you get older, you start drinking less. There's also potentially a relationship between age and alcohol consumption. So I want to make sure that any relationship I find between alcohol consumption and cholesterol is not down to age or sex or BMI or hypertension or diabetes or diet. So I measure people's age or their sex or their BMI or all these things, and I throw them in the statistical model. And the statistical model says, okay, this amount of variability in cholesterol can be explained by age. And because that's already explained by age, when I enter other things, and this is why they add more things to the model as they go, as I add other things in, do those other things still account for variance after we've already factored out the stuff explained by age? So some of the cholesterol changes are explained by age. Whatever changes are left are my new variables explaining whatever's left over after I've already accounted for these things.
I find that to be a very intuitive explanation. Even though I don't quite understand how the math works, I do now kind of get what is mathematically happening behind the scenes, right? You're removing the variables and seeing what effect is left that is unexplained by everything else, and then you chalk that up to the variables that are remaining, in this case, whether or not a patient starts or stops drinking alcohol.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right. So, is there anything missing from these covariables that you would like to see removed? So, Myelin, I'm gonna ask you to pause on that if you have an idea of what I would like to see. But chat, these things, age, sex, BMI, hypertension, diabetes, diet, smoking, activity, exercise, these all definitely influence, whether or not you have good cholesterol or bad cholesterol. Is there another covariable that is missing from this analysis? Because there's a big one here that I think usually does not, is often missed, we'll put it that way. Family history, that I think is actually, it might be accounted for in the medical checkup, because that was kind of vague in the paper as to whether or not family history contributed. In terms of genetics, could be. I would say that there's something else here that is even more important than genetics. I don't know that it's more important than genetics, but I'm also I would also like to point out that this is not a very homogeneous sample, but it is relatively homogeneous in the sense that we're talking about full-time workers in Japan, right? I don't know the breakdown of the different ethnic groups in this study, but we'll probably say that it's probably pretty heavily weighted in one direction. Social setting, that is interesting, but that is a variable that we can kind of like social is kind of in the direction that I would like to see this head towards. What else could affect your health in general that isn't covered by these? Genetics, absolutely, but in terms of getting to measure genetics in a situation like this, where the connection between genetics and cholesterol, like in terms of getting that data, that's actually a little hard. What else could do it? Stress, socioeconomic position. Thank you so much, Dreamless Sleep. That's what I want to see here. Is there's no control for how much money you make here. And that kind of bleeds into the societal argument, right? Like there's a lot of stuff that is not removed that might also have a covariable with how much you drink, right? Like people who make more money can afford to buy more drinks, who can afford to buy better healthcare, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm really not used to operating in such messy circumstances where there are so many covariables. And so all of you have come up with like pretty good other reasons. And I'm not saying those are worse than what I had in mind. It's just that my favorite one is socioeconomic considerations, right? People with more money are going to be healthier, and people with more money can also drink more, right? So there's some influence that money could have, and that's not being removed here. So just keep that in mind. That doesn't mean that this is junk, right? That doesn't mean I throw the whole paper away, because they control for a lot: age, sex, BMI, hypertension, diabetes, diet, etc., etc. That's not nothing. And the fact that this is annual checkups, like, you don't tell your doctor how much money you make, right? Like, that's not information that you could even get from the survey. So I'm not saying that this is bad, or I'm accusing the authors of malfeasance, right? Malfeasance, is that the word? You just can't get the information with a study like this, because if my doctor asked me how much money I'd make, I'd be very confused. But yeah, so it's important to keep in mind as you're reading a paper that you are remaining skeptical. So I'm telling you how to navigate it as someone without expertise. So these things that are unaddressed, you just keep that in the back of your mind. You don't throw the whole paper out, but keep it in the back of your mind until you finish reading the paper, and then you can see, does a socioeconomic covariable change the conclusion that the paper could make, right? And we'll come back to that in the future. This paper is investigating a Japanese sample, right? Yes, exactly. I would have never thought of socioeconomic status. Well, yeah, exactly. And so if a lot of health papers, if they don't include socioeconomic status as a covariable, it can be tricky to interpret it, because again, the more money you have, the better, right? Mo money is not equal to mo health problems, right? Generally, the more money you have, the better you can, the better care you can afford, unfortunately, but that is just true.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Any thoughts, Myelin, so far on how I've treated the subject so far?
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think I do think some of this is like there's a lot of things associated with socioeconomic status that they cannot address in this paper, but some of the things that you and Chad have brought up, they do measure number of drinks, and they also measure type of alcohol, which to some extent can control for like the budget for shopping for alcohol and stuff like that. But there are a lot of other things in there, like stress, the type of job you have, drinking culture in Japan around like drinking as an expectation of socializing with coworkers and stuff is another thing, and that varies depending on the type of job. There's a lot of stuff. From a statistical standpoint, what did surprise me, and it could be just be that they didn't have space in here, is usually when you're adding more things to a model, like more covariates, like they go from model 1 and then they add hypertension, diabetes, and diet and stuff like that. Usually you do some type of test to see if adding those variables in is actually explaining any additional variance. Because if you just add variables in but they're not doing anything, you're hurting your statistical power without actually gaining any new information. And I don't see that here.
Yeah, I think.
But then again, oh, sorry.
I do think all of these inclusions in this model is extremely reasonable when talking about cholesterol.
Yeah. And also, like, given their sample size, do they really need to worry about statistical power? I think they might have too much, really.
Yeah, so. And I want to talk about that later, Myelin, because you have much more experience with that than I do. But yeah, teaser. All right, so I was reading this paper, kind of last minute. I was like, I really want to stream because I love streaming. It's so much fun. But then I got to this section and I was like, I need to talk to Myelin because I don't understand what I'm reading. I don't think we're going to hang up on this, but I read this line, Gaussian family with an identity link function, and I like giggled because I'm just like thinking about Yu-Gi-Oh the entire time. Like link monsters, like what are these words? Like, why is statistics so freaking difficult? But I did chat with Myelin about like what this means. And I don't know, Myelin, if you have like anything very like pressing to say about it. What I took your explanation to me was what they did was fine. And that's what I took away from it.
Pretty much. Yeah, this is they're using a lot of fancy words to say we didn't do anything special with our test.
Okay, yeah, exactly. Thank you. Oh, and Hazy, welcome. Thanks for dropping by.
Hazy!
Yeah, so yeah, because I was like, I don't freaking know. And this is an important instance of like, I'm acknowledging my limitations of my understanding, right? I took Stats 101 in undergraduate. I did only the statistical stats tests that were necessary for my experiments in graduate school. And so I'm very much like a status novice. So instead of pretending like I know more, I asked someone who definitely does know more about me in this field.
I will say I'm not wholly familiar with the exact type of test that they're doing here, so I do want to give that disclaimer, but
Yeah, and you
I'm
can
familiar with
see
the family.
that even Myelin, who teaches stats, just science is so broad that it's very much that meme of like, oh, you're a statistician, name every statistical test. It's like, no, nobody's capable of that. But as an aggregate, we can work together to make sense of things.
Yeah,
Okay.
by our powers combined.
Yeah, we got by our powers combined, we can maybe be one psych and MD one day.
Yeah.
Okay, so here we have the performance of the models here, and again, I read this table. I was like, I have no idea what this means. I don't know what beta means. I kind of know what a 95% confidence interval is, but Myelin, do you have any kind of comments or observations? Because to me, I know you explained this to me in our private chat, but I'm gonna be honest, I still don't really know what I should be taking away from this table.
That's fair. So this is their regression table. The B's, the betas, they're kind of like a combination of a test statistic, like a T value or an F value or a correlate. They're like correlations, kind of. And if this was a simpler model, they would be effectively correlations. They're a combination of how big of an impact there is, what direction the impact was, and whether this is significant or not. So this 1 unit increase of alcohol in model 1, that beta of negative 1.58, it's negative, so that indicates that there is a decrease in LDLC. And so for every 1 unit increase of alcohol consumed, there is a 1.58 unit decrease in the LDLC, it looks like. And then the 99% confidence interval, they're actually using 99% confidence interval, which I don't see too often. Usually it's 95. If that includes 0, so if the upper and lower end includes 0, that means this is not statistically significant. But because I don't think any of these include 0, I don't think any of these cross over 0, so all of these are significant at a p of less than 0.01 level.
So what I'm taking away is that if you start drinking, even in every single model, even the most strict model, there does seem to be a decrease of 1.59 units for every one drink that you drink. Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like that's not changing from model to model so much, so it doesn't really matter what they control for. It's still explaining roughly an equal amount.
Yeah, which I think is interesting. So, so like, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the argument that actually, I'll save it for the next slide, I think. And you can see that this effect is bidirectional, right? So if you start drinking alcohol, your bad fat goes down and your good fat goes up. LDL is bad, HDL is good. And then the bottom part here, alcohol cessation, so cohort 2, if you stop drinking alcohol, for every drink that you no longer drink, you have an increase in your bad LDL, in your bad fat, and a decrease in your good fat. So I'm reading this, my whole thing is that alcohol is poison. I drink very rarely. It's associated with all sorts of negative things. And yet I am reading data from a journal that is not unheard of, right? JAMA. I'm not like a health person, but I know that whenever I read a health paper, there are a lot that are published in JAMA, JAMA. I don't know if they're like super prestigious, but they do pop up a lot. So I'm inclined to believe that they're not lying to me here, right? And the statistics pass Myelin's smell check. We'll just call it that. Mm-hmm. So I'm forced to acknowledge here that there may be a real change, a positive change for your health upon drinking alcohol, and a negative when you stop. And so that is very hard for me to accept. And if we take a look at the alcohol type, we can see that these are 95% confidence intervals, which means that we can shorthand this by saying that we're pretty sure that the actual real value is in between these two bars. And you can see that it doesn't really matter what drink you have, beer, wine, whiskey, sochu, sake, other total, you see a very consistent decrease in bad fat when you start drinking, right? Initiation per one drink. And then when you stop drinking, that relationship is flipped, right? So this is starting to drink, your bad cholesterol is down. This is stopping, your bad cholesterol is up. Bidirectional, when you start drinking, your good cholesterol goes up. And then when you stop drinking, your good cholesterol goes down. And so this is really, really, really surprising. Really surprising. And
Maybe I should start drinking.
that's what a reasonable person could conclude given the current data, right? Like, to me, this is a really shocking finding, but don't.
Yeah, no, that was a joke. That was a joke. There's more.
I'm talking to chat though. Don't click off the video and go, "5 the Nutrafil said that it's okay to drink and that it's good for you." I am explaining to you live what my emotional reaction is. I'm like, wow, I'm really surprised that there's some effect that is positive at all for reasons why we will talk about later. You might not want to pick up a drink anyway, and we'll see how we navigate that information space, right? So improvements in lipid panel are dose dependent. So the more drinks that you start, the better the effect is. The more drinks that you stop, the worse your cholesterol gets. And so this is, again, dose dependent. And so does anybody have a very important question to ask here? So I'm reading this, I'm going, wow, these changes appear to be real. And I want to just sit for a second and think about if there are any important questions that you want answered. People are asking for the mechanism. I would love to know the mechanism. The mechanism is very, very interesting, but let's think about what the average person who is not a 5 the Nutrafil viewer wants to know. Someone who doesn't care as much about biology. A very, very important question. And I'll just let us sit on that. What is the time between drinking increase and decrease in cholesterol measurement? Is it permanent or just temporary? There's an even more basic question than that. And we'll come up to it kind of soon. I don't want to spoil it, so I'm going to check where my... Okay. Okay. Yeah, just hang on that idea for a second while we continue. Okay, so it looks like alcohol could potentially be good for you. Am I really about to plug alcohol consumption as something with a potential health benefit? That is very, very... I didn't want to do that. I would actually consider not having the stream at all if I was about to plug alcohol consumption because of, my ethics, the ethics involved of making a recommendation that could possibly harm your health. And we know that alcohol has all sorts of negative health effects as well. So before I had a crisis, I went back to Google Scholar and I asked, what does the broader literature change? What did the broader literature say? So here is a paper from the BMJ. So this is a very trustworthy source, the BMJ. And this is a review paper, a meta-analysis of alcohol consumption on biological markers. And so when you take a look at this review paper, what you see is that, actually, you don't see the effect on low density lipoprotein anymore when you aggregate all of these studies with, over different conditions and stuff. Cholesterol seems to be the same. The asterisk tells you that it is statistically significant. So in terms of low density lipoprotein, bad fat, there doesn't appear to be a major effect. Cholesterol doesn't appear to be a major effect, but good cholesterol, there does. And that is true for the meta-analysis as well. So that was also very, very shocking to me. So yeah, I was like, this is so I'm feeling very negative about this because I had this belief that alcohol is poison, and so I had to think, remember your training, Phi. Okay, assuming the difference in lipid panel is real, but does it replicate in a study where there are more of the same conditions, right? So the meta-analysis is an aggregate of a lot of different studies with a lot of different conditions. Is there another study that replicates this finding in a very similar situation? So here's another paper. And so this harkens back to this other paradigm that I'm trying to coin here is these two important questions when you're reading science information. Is the data real, which concerns statistics, and is the data meaningful, methodology and validity, right? So real and meaningful, if you say yes to them both, then it's worth changing your mind about something. But if you only have one or the other, then, well, actually, you can't have meaningful without real, right? It's a prerequisite. But if you have the answers to these questions, then you can consider changing your mind, right? So these are the methods of this original paper. These are health checkups that are compulsory in Japan. So is there another study that has a similar method in Japan that also replicates this finding? And the answer to that is yes. So unfortunately, I don't think I can show the data from this paper, but this is another paper checking the association between drinking and low density lipoprotein or non-HDL cholesterol. And this replicates this finding. So another paper in a Japanese sample that shows that drinking drinking lowers bad cholesterol. Oh my god, it's so counterintuitive that I can't even say it correctly. So that is very, very interesting, and I'm getting a boiling feeling in my stomach that I've been wrong about alcohol, right? Okay, so I'm convinced that this is real, but is this meaningful, chat? So for those of you who are just coming in, we looked at data showing that there is a very real increase in good cholesterol when you start drinking, and a very real, in this paper, right? We just looked at a review paper that said that the only effects were in HDL, but again, it's complicated, whatever. The idea here is that this one paper is showing that you start drinking and your cholesterol gets better, and when you stop drinking, your cholesterol gets worse. And I've been forced by the data to believe this because I can't in good faith dispute it. I don't know enough about the field, but from what I have read, I am changing my mind. The difference is real. The next question is this meaningful? So now I will go back to chat and ask, is it meaningful? Does it matter? Does this difference in HDL and LDL, does it matter? And Nicholas says, does the positive effect weigh out the other negative effects of alcohol? That's an excellent question to ask. And the question that I'm trying to lead chat to is even more basic than that.
If I'm reading your mind, Hairday might have it.
Oh, Hairday might have it? Let me go ahead and scroll up. You could be real in specific circumstances, but not large enough to produce meaningful differences in outcomes. Ding, 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 ding. Hairday, you got it. Thanks for keeping track of chat, Myelin. Yeah, so the difference is real, but do we care? I mean, let me be clear, chat. You all had excellent questions, but your questions are assuming too much, right? You are assuming already that it is meaningful to a certain degree. Before we can consider your questions, chat, we first have to check if this increase actually has any biological relevance immediately, right? So long-term effects, that's a more complicated question with a more complicated answer, but we're dealing with just a single paper and its outcome, right? So thinking about whether or not this change is big enough, and I was actually very purposeful with not explaining the measurements, the axes, and this is why it's important that you read your axes, right? That you read and understand what the magnitude of these things are. So this is a graphic I borrowed from Healthline, and this shows you the range of cholesterol values, right? So you want to be here in the good range. So this is 60 or higher, 60 milligrams per deciliter or something. So you want a lot of good cholesterol, ideally higher than 60. There's some sex differences, which is interesting. You want less than 100 milligrams per deciliter for your LDL. We can ignore triglycerides because they don't address that in this paper. And if you are high, then high LDL is considered to be 160 to 190. 190 is very high, and beyond that is a medical emergency probably. So with those scales in mind, let's have another look at that data. So now I ask you, chat, with the idea that 160 milligrams per deciliter is considered high for LDL and less than 100 is considered healthy for LDL, is this data actually meaningful? What do you think, chat? Looking at this data, does this change your mind about alcohol consumption and its potential benefit? What does it look like if we're looking at these axes? Yeah, changing 8 isn't too much. HDL tanking. Well, HDL, it's a lot more tightly in a tighter range in terms of milligram per deciliter. Yeah, not significant, not substantially. Exactly. It's kind of small. Exactly. if we look at the dose dependence, the best benefit you get is dose dependent. So the more you drink, the more this changes, right? But you get a less than 10 milligram per deciliter swing for 3 drinks a day. 3 drinks a day. That's an insane amount of alcohol to be drinking every day for a less than 10 milligram per deciliter swing, right? So I'm acknowledging that, okay, alcohol, it looks like it has some measurable effect at 3 drinks a day. But the swing, the magnitude of that swing is not very significant, right? That is important to recognize, right? And the thing is I just made an assumption there, right? I Googled, which I think all doctors hate, is Googling health stuff. So I actually asked a real doctor. So PsychinMD, you can find a link to his Twitch channel in my description. I've collabed with him before. This is a doctor VTuber. And I shot him a Discord message and I showed him this data and I asked, Psychin, does this data make you think differently about the role of alcohol in health? And this is his response. No, Lamau, it's a size of the effect argument. Sure, it's statistically significant, but if your LDL is still in the high 100s, being able to drink alcohol to help that isn't going to really do anything. Again, 10 milligram per deciliter swing. If you're in the high 100s, this is not an intervention that does all that much. I'm still going to put you on Lipitor. And at that point, drinking alcohol will harm my intervention. So this is an actual expert in the field. And you can see that we happened upon the same conclusion, even though I don't have his expertise, but I checked with him in case I was missing any kind of nuance, right? Because not having an expert background means that you don't know what you don't know. So it's always good to just double check with a doctor, right? Okay. Can someone check up on the Japanese salaryman? Yeah, exactly. Like there's that video that was going around of that Japanese salaryman making a valiant effort to walk in a straight line. And at 3 drinks a day, like, gosh, that's incredible, right? Okay, so chat, how many drinks per week do you think you need to have to be considered a heavy drinker? Psychin was saying that alcohol interferes with treatment, right? I think that's what he was saying, although I'm not entirely sure. How many drinks do you think you need to have in a week to be considered a heavy drinker? Heavy drinker. Like this is like a medical kind of categorization. How many drinks do you think you need to drink a week to be a heavy drinker? Not a day, a week. Right? Because this data, this is 3 a day, so this is 21 drinks in a week. How many would you have to drink to be considered a heavy drinker? 7, 3 or 4, 7, like 10, 2 per week. Y'all are good. Y'all are underestimating how much people drink. 25, 26. That's a little heavy. So let's take a look. So in between these guesses is the actual answer. Heavy drinking is considered 15 drinks a week. So the benefit of 10 milligrams per deciliter puts you in a category where you are overshooting heavy drinking by 6 drinks a week. That's insane, right? So again, this benefit, again, this is like what, like 3 per, like maybe a 5% change in your LDL. The trade-off is that you are now a heavy drinker. Whoa, that's crazy. That is bonkers, isn't it? So look, I'm not a doctor. I'm not here to tell you how to live your life, right? But let's just look at the data, right? The data that is put in front of us that we don't need a medical degree to interpret. Drinking less than 1.5 drinks a day doesn't move the needle. Drinking between 1.5 and 3 drinks a day barely moves the needle. And then drinking more than 3 drinks a day barely moves the needle, and also now you're an alcoholic. So, is my mind changed by this paper? I'll let you figure that out. But Myelin, I want to get your kind of read and reaction on what I had just presented here.
I'm sorry. No, I think that that's a great thing because I think we came to the effect size conclusion roughly around the same time, just completely independently. Like, wait, that seems like a thing that you should take into account. And it just occurred to me as as you're streaming, the fact that they're controlling for all these things, they're creating an environment that is not the environment that we actually live in. Like, it's possible that this actually interacts with age or BMI or something like this, and it only reduces bad cholesterol and increases good cholesterol or whatever it is, in a vacuum when you factor out every other possible influence, right? So, like, is this even meaningful in a real human being? Unclear.
Yeah, and in the Reddit comments, I heard a lot of anecdotes about like, oh, this is why my LDL spiked when I stopped drinking. This is why my HDL, was better when I started drinking. Though that's just
No.
anecdotal data, right?
Yeah,
Like
that's
this,
probably just a coincidence.
or rather, I cannot confirm that it is a coincidence, but I would say that if I had
Mhm.
to bet money on it, right? And this is another paradigm. I'm full of paradigms today. But in terms of like how you should think about having a scientific opinion, I think it is good to word your belief in terms of would I bet money on something, because that puts the pedal to the metal, right? If someone were to tell me, oh, I know for certain that when I drink alcohol, my LDL goes down, my HDL goes up, I would bet against that because there are so many other factors that probably have a bigger effect on your cholesterol than how much of this poison you end up drinking. And again, I was open-minded. I kept this idea of like convincing me or not convincing me. I looked at previous literature. I honestly gave an assessment of the stuff that was consistent with this paper. There are good journals that also replicate this effect, right? The effect that alcohol has when you aggregate amongst a huge population, I believe that that is real. I do not believe it is meaningful. And I think that is a really nuanced take. And I think you should take that with you when you read another silly headline.
Mhm. Mhm.
All right. So there's some other stuff here that this made me think about, because like this paper itself, I don't think is that interesting, but like me thinking about my own experience with this paper really was a lot of fun, I think. Okay, so the reason why I picked this paper is because this is the headline that I read, right? Large study, so making an argument that this is not a small scale study, this is a large study, shows drinking alcohol is good for your cholesterol levels, and the subtitle being, there are many risks from drinking, but high cholesterol doesn't seem to be one. So in the press releases for the news articles that were written about this paper, this is how they were wording their headlines. So, of course, if you read just the headline, you're going to miss the body of the text that shows that there are caveats to this, right? The effect size is small. Other things have a bigger effect on your health than this paper, than drinking alcohol does. But the thing to keep in mind is that there are a lot of people who are going to read this headline and then not read the article. And there's like very little that anybody can do about that. And I want to equip you, my audience, with the thinking tools to be able to navigate this environment where everything is clickbait in an intelligent way while keeping your mind open, right? Because I think we got into a lot of hot water as science communicators in just being like, science is always right. You should listen to the science. It's like, okay, remember back to that era where I was like, if you don't want to think at all about making your own decisions, just listen to the experts, right? There's nothing wrong with that. I would bet money on an expert being right, or an aggregate of experts, right? If the American Medical Association tells me something about my health, I would bet money that they're right and not Joe Schmo YouTuber, right? Like, and that's what I mean by thinking about truth in terms of betting. So where would you rather put your money in? A society of doctors and scientists, or random TikToker, right? That doesn't actually say like, maybe random TikToker could be right. That's technically true, but I wouldn't bet money on it, and that's what I think the difference is. So the fact that this paper, this news article starts off by large study shows drinking alcohol is good for your cholesterol levels. Myelin actually has a really interesting point about studies with large sample size. So I'll kind of let you chime in with your insight, Myelin.
Yes. So, one large studies are good. I mean, it's very good to have a lot of data. less sampling area of a bigger chunk of the population, you're probably going to get more robust, reliable, replicable conclusions from that. And we can see that in that these are tiny effects, like Phi hit on, like Psych and MD mentioned. These are pretty small effects, and that makes them hard to find. But when you have a sample size that's big enough, you'll be able to find effects of just about it. This is particularly true for correlations, but like when your sample size is so big, you will find effects that basically anything will pop out significant at that point. If you're getting into tens, hundreds of thousands of data points like they have in here. And also some of this is within subjects data. They're watching the same patients over multiple visits, which also decreases your sampling error. So you can find really, really tiny effects like these tiny effects here. At this point, it's not so much useful to look at whether they rejected the null or not, whether their effect is significant or not. You really need to pay attention to the effect size. That is way more meaningful. And I think that's part of why they probably use confidence intervals in here, because they give you more information on the size of the effect of whether than just it's significant or not. And that's kind of what these journalists fell prey to. We often focus on, is the effect significant and like, is it there or not? But that's not the only question we should be asking. It's, is it meaningful or not? Like you've been saying, Phi. And I think we often conflate, and there's like an understanding gap between how researchers and statisticians talk about significant versus how like average conversations consider what significant means. Like I feel like in an average conversation, significant means like this is a really meaningful thing. Whereas for us, significant is just like, does this appear real or not? That doesn't mean it's meaningful, which can lead to headlines like this, I think.
That's why I really like the two question approach. Is the data real and is the data meaningful? And for most people without a scientific background, you just kind of have to assume that the data are real because you don't have the tools to dispute it. But even as a non-expert, you can, with your own eyes, make a conclusion. Doesn't mean your conclusion is right, but you can make a conclusion about a study's meaningfulness, right? And the person that can help you do that better is your doctor or your healthcare professional. Speaking of which, hello, Rico, nurse VTuber in the chat, Rico Siempre. Go check them out for actual health stuff, because I am but a biologist, right? I am looking afar from my lab, looking on into the health world as a non-expert and trying to guide people through how to think about papers rather than conveying actual information. So I cede to Rico and Saiken, the actual healthcare professionals of the VTubing world, when it comes to making recommendations. But you'll notice that at no point did I personally make a recommendation into any health thing at all, right? Like I didn't tell you to drink more. I didn't tell you to drink less. I don't have the power to do that, but a doctor does. What I have the power to tell you, however, is that the effect sizes are very small and you do whatever you want to do with that information, right? I think talking to people like that, especially people who are more invested into actually learning the science, can help it make you feel like you are more in control of what you read and what you act upon, right? Because I think there's a certain phenotype of person that reacts very negatively to just listening to whatever their doctor says. I'm not one of those people. My doctor says jump, I'll jump. My doctor says, do whatever, I'm going to do whatever. I had one questionable experience with a doctor, and that was when they told me that ketchup was a vegetable. I got, ketchup fulfilled your food group requirement. I got a second opinion. So, doctors are not infallible either. But in terms of, again, thinking about certainty as betting, I would bet on most doctors more than I would bet on my own understanding of something ultimately. Although that doesn't mean I can't do my background research beforehand, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. So I really feel for people who want to take a proactive approach to their own health, but don't necessarily have the background to do so, right? Not everybody has a research background where they are taught how to navigate confusing information. And so there's this pipeline, and Myelin can, you can comment on this however you want, right? But this is something that I pulled together because this kind of reflects my own conspiracy thinking, and I'll share that. Yes, I have fallen for some health misinfo, and I'm open to sharing it just to show you that not because there are powerful social and cognitive factors that go into buying health BS. That and just having a fancy degree doesn't necessarily stop you from doing so. Although when I fell for this, I was still a high schooler. And some of you are quite young, right? Like some of you don't have, you have the smarts, but not the practice with navigating the science world. And so there's so much information out there. You can find anything that says anything. So how is anybody supposed to make sense of anything, right? One possible way that you can find yourself buying into some health BS is this pipeline of finding something that is counter to the consensus. So like this paper, oh, alcohol is actually good for your blood. Anti-authoritarian narrative. Doctors, yeah, doctors hate this guy, right? Like you see that all the time. Doctors hate him for this one simple trick, right? One-upping elites. I know better than my doctor. My doctor's bought out by big pharma. And that leads you down to a very dark path of conspiracy thinking, stuff that I would not bet on because I trust the science. And so I'll tell a little story. Well, actually, first, Myelin, since you have more experience, sort of talking about this pipeline, I want to hear what your reaction is to how I've presented this, and if there are any interesting nuances that you would like to add here.
Yeah, looking at it, most of the literature I'm familiar with hasn't looked at it from this angle. There is evidence that just generally trusting government, or like the more you trust government or health professionals or stuff, the less you tend to believe these conspiracy theories. And of course, there are health professionals who absolutely, like Rico's observing, I think. There are health professionals that believe this, but more generally, the more you trust authority figures, the less you believe these things. I haven't seen as much evidence of this desire to one up others being associated with belief in conspiracy theories, but there is stuff like there's some preliminary evidence that need to feel unique or like you have special knowledge that other people doesn't have is associated with it. So I could see that playing into this. Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to kind of address what Louise is saying in terms of like science is often treated as a religion. And so there's a practical barrier between a layman's understanding of science and science itself, right? Because it's impossible to be an expert in every single field, right? Which is why I'm very careful about my own expertise. I there's a certain limit where I draw where I cannot be more informed because I don't have 4 years to spend in medical school, right? So there's a certain point where you just have to accept that no one human being can contain all the knowledge in the universe. And so you have to outsource some of your cognitive thinking to a person or peoples or systems that you trust, right? And I think that's very important to acknowledge that I, throughout this entire journey, have made it very clear. And when I didn't know, I asked Psychen. When I didn't know, I asked Myelin. I asked for feedback in areas that I was deficient in, because no man is an island, and so I would bet on people who have studied, for example, vaccines their entire life to inform me on decisions I should make about my health with regards to vaccines, right? And people can disagree with that. That's totally fine. It's not a bet I would make. But if we reword kind of the thinking about whether or not science is right or not, which has been very yes, no, always trust the science, et cetera, it's more like I bet on science on what the major bodies of science say as consensus, because I don't get to re-roll my life, right? If I were playing a video game and I could respawn, sure, I'll buy into whatever. I get one life, and the punishment of getting things wrong could be infinite, depending on what context you're talking about. And so, as a betting person, I choose to bet on expertise. Is that fair to say? All right. Okay. So let's. Oh, and also, welcome, Saturday. One-upping might be elite people intergroup context. Yeah, that was just kind of my like shorthand, because I'm not like an expert in this field, but like the feeling that I had when I fell for this upcoming conspiracy theory is one of like one-upping people who feel like they want to control your life, right? So, all right.
Kind of a reactance thing.
Yeah. So I used to wash my hair with vinegar. So this is kind of a crazy thing to admit, right? But this paper actually like brought back a lot of deep repressed memory where yeah, this is like the most insane thing. Yikes, he's a genius. Yep. So how could anybody fall for something like this, right? So I was in high school and there were a lot of like websites titled like Healthy Living or whatever, and they said that vinegar was a cheaper, safer, because sodium lauryl sulfate was a big concern back in the day, alternative to shampoo and conditioner. I should still say that sodium lauryl sulfate, which is a compound in a lot of your cleaning products that you use on your body, I'm not like an expert in dermatology, so I can't actually tell you whether or not there's any teeth behind this, whether or not dermatologists agree. That's not my field of expertise. And again, acknowledging my expertise, outsourcing it to people who know better than I, may be an interesting topic for the future. So I was really big into saving, right? And thinking that, in a very anti-capitalist way, that a lot of companies would try to rip me off all the time. And so I bought into a very like, big L'Oreal wants me to continue buying their shampoo and conditioner when I could just use vinegar, and I could, and there were guides on like how to make the smell tolerable. So you would use apple cider vinegar and put a sprig of rosemary in it. And then that would make it smell a lot better, and it would leave your hair feeling admittedly very smooth. However, so I bought in hard, right? So my interpretation of me having smooth hair as an adult, I recognize that my hair was, as some of the people in chat are saying, greasy. It wasn't smooth or soft. It was just flat out greasy. It was oily. I was a dumb teenager, right? So this is something I bought in very hard because it played into a narrative that I wanted to believe. I wanted to believe that I could get one up on these companies that wanted to cheat me out of my limited money as a high schooler. So I thought, we save a couple bucks every couple months, and put that money away, invest it in something. Maybe if I were a kid, maybe I would have invested in like Bitcoin or well, what if it were Bitcoin? I would be rich by now. But like an NFT or something, I don't know, like gullible shit, right? So yeah, so I want to be open that like I have a degree now that allows me to peruse literature and do my own thinking, but without that research background, that's really, really hard. That's really, really hard, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So sorry, I lost my train of thought. Yeah, so what does the research actually say, right? So when we're talking about using vinegar as like a replacement for shampoo and conditioner, as an adult, like as a kid, I just Googled it, right? But as an adult, I have Google Scholar. I have Google for I have Google for big brains, right? So what does the research say? If you search vinegar shampoo, vinegar hair, acetic acid shampoo, or acetic acid hair, you get a ton of books. You get a ton of books that people sell to the average person. Okay, so I'm actually going to time you out because this is not the place to do that, Louise. I am very much someone who is very conventional in my assessment of science, so let's not do that. Especially because currently in America, institutions of science are currently being under attack, and there are a lot of things going on in America right now that is tough, to say the least, with regards to people's ability to operate in a very safe manner. So we're just not going to have that anymore. Okay. So when you look at papers, however, that's a different story, right? So there are a lot of books, and you can do this for yourself and just search Google Scholar for this kind of stuff. And you can find a lot of books that so all natural alternatives to shampoo and conditioner. You can find a lot of books that talk about historical ways that people have cleaned their hair. I don't trust the books, right? Books, if they are worth writing, will have cited information from papers. And so papers seem to fall in a couple of different categories here, right? So papers that I have read have shown that vinegar might have some kind of benefit as a skin cleanser, right? In terms of anything having to do with hair, I went a couple of pages deep on Google Scholar and only found vinegar as a way to treat head lice, nothing having to do with cleaning your hair or improving the texture, etc., etc. I found one mouse paper that was done a while back, but that's it. Yeah. So, using the convincing paradigm, I am not convinced that substituting shampoo for vinegar will have any benefit for my hair, right? So again, I actually have not found anything that shows that vinegar hurts your hair, right? Apart from my own personal experience with making my hair super greasy, which again is anecdote. It's anecdote, I admit that. But I'm not convinced that substituting shampoo and conditioner for vinegar will benefit my hair as an adult, right? As a person with a developed cortex. I'm really hard on my past self, but and I just didn't know any better, and I'm digging at myself for fun, but I don't judge anybody for falling for anything like this because there's a lot of crap out there, a lot of crap out there. Switch to balsamic vinegar, got it. Technically, there's not research out there that shows balsamic vinegar isn't great for your hair either, right?
There you go.
Yeah. So this is a fun little thing at the end here. Where
it is.
we have research hell, which I think is a fun little tool that we can use when we assess papers that are maybe not so good here. So this is a list that Myelin and I came up with about kind of the sins in order of, I don't know, forgivability, right? Because so far I've covered like vaping and mice, which people were super upset by, but it turned out not to be that bad. I covered that aspartame paper again. People were furious at the aspartame paper. It wasn't that bad. And now I want to talk about this alcohol paper and where it lies in the research hell. But before we do that, Myelin, I wanted to talk about our personal experience talking to each other about this idea of research hell, because I thought it was really fun.
It's delightful. We need to make this a thing.
Yeah. So the birth of this like paradigm. Oh, dude, I'm full of paradigms today. I gave Myelin a short list of like things that like give me the ick when it comes to research papers, and then I asked Myelin to contribute with what gave them the ick, and Myelin added a whole bunch, and we actually, by total coincidence, came up with 9 items. Isn't that crazy? 9 items for 9 circles of hell. Is that a Dante's Inferno's reference? Absolutely, right? So before we talk about where this paper ends up in research hell, Myelin, can you talk we'll talk a little bit about what we are defining as these sins, we'll call them. So poor writing, I believe you put this on here. So Myelin, do you want to talk about what constitutes as poor writing to you?
I hesitate to even qualify it as a sin, but there's a lot of papers where it's very difficult to understand what is going on in the paper. And there's a paper that I need to finish. We're going to try and finish reading it on stream tomorrow, but that I'm reading on my channel on stream. And it's poorly written. Like, it's clearly not an intentional thing, but it's very difficult to draw any conclusions from it. There are cases where it seems like they're doing bad research practices, but it's just, they're not communicating well. So yeah, it's not that they're intentionally doing something bad, but they're communicating in such a opaque way that you can't get good information out of it.
I would consider, like, my students are learning how to write, right? And so their writing is often quite poor. It's not on purpose, but they just don't have the skills yet. They will by the end of the semester. They don't have the skills yet to communicate clearly. And so much of science writing, people make it seem like it's really boring, that like that science writing is so technical and not expressive. That's entirely not true. I actually really love science writing because it's taking complicated ideas and making it so that the reader doesn't have to work too hard to write to understand them. And that itself is art and expression, right? There are beautifully written papers out there that give you a sense of artistic expression because they are taking complicated information and making it edible, I guess you could call it, right? And that is art. No one can tell you how to do that in a mechanical way. It is something that you learn over time through the artistry of writing, right? So actually, Yan Yan saying that poor writing reminds them of the aspartame paper. I would actually say that the aspartame is a little worse than poor writing because I think some of those writing choices were deliberate, whereas poor writing is just, you know, it does. I guess, Myelin, maybe the distinguishing factor between poor writing and misleading language is that poor writing is often done without a purpose, right? Without
it's
trying
the intent.
Yeah, it's the intent. It's the intent.
What is it? The mens rea or something? I don't know law.
Sure. I think
the intent
so.
or knowledge of wrongdoing. Yes, that's it.
Oh, gotcha. I understand. Yeah. So then misleading language. I don't remember if you or I put this on here, but I think misleading is...
I think that was you.
Gotcha. So I put misleading language over our overreaching conclusion. Misleading language is essentially... This is where I put the aspartame paper, is in these two categories of like... They are leading you in a particular direction and allowing you to fill in the blanks where they don't have to be culpable for telling you something that is false, right? So giving you all of the tools to come to the conclusion that they want you to come to without explicitly saying it because they know that they're kind of wrong. So that's how I would describe misleading language, is allowing you to make the mistake, like misleading you so that you end up thinking something that isn't true so that they don't have to lie.
Many such cases where you read a paper and like, I can't believe they'd say that. And then you read it back and they didn't say that.
Yeah. They made you lie in your head. And that's why this is in research hell. Right. I think poor writing, this is the equivalent of like limbo, right? Like you were not accepted into the heavenly kingdom, but you are in limbo. Yeah. Misleading language. Yeah, they are making you make the mistake in your head. It's not that bad because if you are diligent, you can avoid being misled. You just have to be careful. And then overreaching conclusions. So this is the aspartame paper. This is potentially also the vaping paper, although I don't feel as strongly about that. And this is also where I would put the press releases of this paper, right?
Yeah.
They want you to believe...
Lots of headlines are this.
Yeah, lots of headlines are exactly this. The headline wants you to believe that drinking alcohol is going to increase your good fat and decrease your bad fat. That is technically true, but it is an overreach to say that it has any sort of significance for your health, right? I don't think this paper is...
it's not...
Sorry, go ahead.
No.
So Hanroy says, I don't think this paper is misleading. Like, it isn't trying to convince you to drink or anything. It's more just showing a result. Yeah, exactly. That's why I was careful in saying the media title is an overreaching conclusion. The paper is fine, just not very impressive. Like, I don't care about the paper. It's the media coverage that made me kind of mad.
I thought it was a very good paper overall. Yeah, it's just you gotta pay attention to the effect size and the media.
Yan Yan says, are you on Twitter enough to know about Zhen Kui He, the guy who was saying ethics is holding back scientific innovation and progress? I think I read that, and it reminds me of that undergrad that I used to teach that thought that animal rights was holding back biology, and I was like, come on.
Oh my god.
Come on, you're just...
We've seen what happens when you take the ethics out of science, and it's not a good thing.
Should we put ethics in there? But the thing is, we have 9 levels of hell already.
Yeah. I feel like ethics almost goes without saying. Like, some of these things I would consider unethical, but...
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah, the CRISPR guy. The human CRISPR guy. Yeah, I do remember him.
Oh, that guy.
Yeah.
Even I know about that guy.
Yeah, I forgot what his exact name was, but yeah. All right. Anyway, next up here, speaking of people who need challenging, Yeah, like these three up here, I color coded them differently because I think they are annoying, but not that bad, right? Like you can avoid these landmines by just being present. But these next ones are like really annoying. Like I don't know. I'm a little in between on unchallenged hypothesis. So let me explain this. This is when a paper is not technically doing anything wrong and could be actually quite good, but it doesn't ever try to disprove itself. And so I think that this is a very manipulative, technically okay thing to do where it's like misleading language, except the conclusion that you make isn't wrong. It's just like a car salesman, right? Like they're overselling and like they're being very careful. These three up here are pretty easy to catch. This one is a lot harder to catch, which is why I put it lower on the list, even though I think it's more ethical than overreaching conclusion, because this can cause you to develop your own understanding based on really convincing writing from the authors who in reality didn't try that hard to disprove themselves. And I'm wondering if you've ever experienced that, Myelin.
Well, we think about this a little differently in psychology. Like, I think we talked about this the other night that, yeah, we think about this differently in psychology. It's becoming more of a norm in psychology, or maybe this is just in the circles that I run in, to challenge your own hypotheses specifically by making as many reasonable hypotheses as you can. Like, well, this theory says it could go one way, but this theory could say it could go the other way. So I'm kind of and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm conceptualizing this as like only looking at it from one viewpoint, not considering the other viewpoints at all.
Yeah, so I can illustrate this with a biology example because I think that the way that you and I would conceive of an experiment is quite different. Just because, like, I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of stuff in psychology is about designing really good tests for trying to measure something without other things interfering because humans are complicated. And so making sure you nail that is often in the cleverness of that design of whatever questionnaire or whatever thing you are trying to do. In biology, a hypothesis, like our struggle is trying to control for everything, not in questions, but in terms of experiments, right? So if I'm never doing experiments that are trying to test other hypotheses, then I could give you an overvalued weight on the conclusions that I have drawn. And I think what that would look like in the psychology realm is like not controlling, for example, age, weight, BMI, like something like that.
That's kind of how I've been viewing it, like not ruling out these other explanations.
Yeah. Rico saying, from what it looks like, they accounted for sex, age, BMI, prior LDL, and prior HDL. Yeah, and they said health questionnaire, like they had filled out, and I don't really know what that means.
They didn't control for that one statistically.
Yeah.
But they might have used it to like exclude certain people from their data.
Yeah, and Rico might be a better source to actually like needle into you know, whether or not that casts a shadow of doubt even larger on the current results. But for me, I didn't bother too much with it, although it is a valid question to ask.
Yeah.
And then the next one here, we have harking. So this is something that I was completely unaware of. Myelin, you're going to have to explain this one for our audience.
Yes. I saw people asking about it in chat earlier. Sorry, I didn't want to break the flow, but yeah, harking. Harking is an acronym for hypothesizing after results are known. This is either maybe you go in with a hypothesis, you get data that isn't consistent with it, and then you just lie and say you predicted that outcome all along, or you go in with no hypothesis, you just do exploratory data, like analysis, and then you pretend that you predicted it all along. Essentially, when you write up the paper, you're writing it as if you knew what was going to happen and that you knew this before you started the study. I think I have that comic that I showed Fi a comic, but it's essentially drawing a target around where your arrow hit. Like,
Yan Yan says Joseph Joestar if he was lame. Yeah, exactly.
Yes, exactly.
That's so true.
That's exactly it.
Yes. So when Myelin told me this, I was really shocked because from my perspective, harking doesn't really happen in biology, although I could be wrong, right? This is speaking from my own research experience. If I get something that contradicts my hypothesis, Um, I think that is very normal to say, well, we had a thing that we thought was true, and then it turned out not to be true, and this cooler thing is actually true. Um, so I actually don't know how prevalent harking is within biological sciences, just because I've personally never had an experience with that. And I'm wondering, Myelin, if because this is also something that happens like behind the scenes, right? Like, are you
Hmm.
aware of how common harking is?
It used to be a lot more common. Like, it wasn't considered bad practice. In fact, in my first year stats class, we weren't so much told to do harking because my professor was personally against it, but it was very common practice. There's a paper by Daryl Bem, who some of you may know for other reasons, but he wrote a very famous paper specifically on how to write scientific papers and how to write them well. And the idea is it's more or it's easier to understand a paper that has a common narrative throughout the whole thing, which would be this is what we predict, this is what we found, it's consistent, here's where it goes next. So he actually heavily suggested harking as a way of making papers easier to read to avoid poor writing, essentially. And so it was a pretty common practice, and I think it still might be a common practice. In fact, I think that's part of like some major people got called out for it kind of recently, and it was considered a good thing to do.
It's like a slippery slope into p hacking sometimes. Is
It's
what Hanroy is
uh,
saying.
I would say it's different from p hacking because p hacking is you're changing the results to be what you predicted. Harking is changing your prediction to match the results. It's kind of like the opposite of p hacking.
So I would say that like this middle tier is not like it's not like cancelable, right?
Yeah.
Like it's annoying, it's bad form in my opinion. Although like harking, yeah, again like p hacking, I think it lives in that bottom layer of hell where it's like
Yes, absolutely.
absolutely.
100%.
Whereas if people hark in biology, I'm not sure that I would even be able to tell, right? Like it
Yeah.
doesn't.
I mean,
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
no, like you're still giving the honest results you got. Like these are honestly the results of your study that you got. You're just lying that saying that you predicted them when you didn't.
I might
So like you're not
actually
lying about what you found, but you're lying about what you thought you'd
I
find.
might move harking upward in the layers because I didn't. Oh, I think this is when we what we agreed upon. But actually, hearing you explain it
Mm.
again, maybe I'm a little softer on harking than I originally thought. Um,
That's fair.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean I don't know either. Like I don't like it, but I understand the explanation for why people do it.
Yeah, it's more sympathetic. I would say. I would say it's
Yeah.
actually more sympathetic than overreaching conclusion. Um, so maybe in
Okay.
2.0,
Yeah. Yeah.
in 2.0, maybe I would swap harking and overreaching conclusion.
Hmm. Yeah, Hanroy is right in that harking can also fall into the like thing where you're just doing a whole bunch of things to see what pops out and then harking. I think that's kind of why I don't like harking that much because in that specific circumstance, if you just take a giant data set, look for something significant, and then you justify why this makes sense after the fact.
I really like Wibble's comment of so it's I knew it all along.
That's harking. That's 100% what it is. That's a great explanation of it.
I think it ranks pretty like low as in like closer to the bottom of hell originally because it does give that like ick factor. Like I think it's
Yeah, because
emotionally repulsive, but it's not actually that bad, I think.
yeah, they're lying, but they're not lying about the data.
Yeah,
They're
yeah.
lying,
They are
but not
lying.
about the data.
I think that's a perfect way of putting it. They're lying but not about the data and the data
Yeah,
at the end of the day, if you have the skill set, that's what you care about. Uh,
yeah.
then we have willful ignorance. So, Mylan, do you want to chat about that?
This is when willful ignorance is when, let's say you have your pet effect, like maybe you've based your entire career on something. I don't want to use examples because I know a lot of famous examples of this, but you based your entire career around this one specific sort of area of research, this one specific phenomenon that maybe you discovered or your advisor discovered or something like that. And then suddenly, as the methods improve, you start to realize that nobody else can find this. You are the only person who can find this effect, this phenomenon, but you keep clinging to it, even when they do exactly your study and they still can't find it, even when you supervise them doing your study and like critique their design, and they still can't get it. No matter how many times other people can't find it, you cling to that effect.
Yeah. And so much of science is about changing your mind, right? Which is why I wanted to
Mhm.
open with saying, here's how I remain cognitively flexible. I frame things in terms of, am I convinced or am I not? Instead of, am I right or am I wrong? Because it feels bad to be wrong, but it doesn't feel bad to update your belief, right? Like
Yes.
that's just, it puts you in a better headspace for that kind of thing.
Yeah. Allows you to save your self-esteem a little
Yeah, exactly. So like
bit.
my technique or my philosophy is that if you get good enough at science communication, you will never be wrong again in your whole life because
Mhm.
you will never frame things as being right or being wrong, but rather consistent with your current belief and inconsistent with your current belief. And then you're just
Mhm.
never wrong anymore, right? Because you can always change your mind later. That doesn't
Yeah.
mean that I'm going to change my mind on whether or not the Earth is flat, right? Like it just means that like, you know, everything has to come into context, be weighed against previous research, et cetera, et cetera. So not being willing to move on. It's so funny that like these line up with existing like biblical sins. Like I think willful ignorance is the sin of pride, right? Like everything
Yeah.
in here is kind of the sin of pride, right? Not being able to
Mhm.
look at your hypothesis in a challenging way because you're afraid of what you might find. Harking,
Mhm.
willful ignorance, it's all prideful behavior, right? It's
Yep.
bad.
Mhm.
All right. Inappropriate analysis. So this one is mostly you because I think it's a little. Okay. Well, you go first, actually.
Well, you're the one who put it on there, but you can talk about it.
Oh, was I
Not
the
that
one
I'm
who put it on there? Oh.
You're the one that put it on there, yeah.
Oh,
Mhm.
interesting. What did I mean? Hold on. Let me go through our chat real quick.
I
What
mean, I
did.
have some ideas about what you might have meant.
Yeah. Why don't you start and then I'll try to figure out what I meant by this.
Um, so sometimes this can be an honest mistake. I'm actually remembering our first collab. There's a lot of statistical techniques out there. We were joking about that earlier, right? And you might not always know the most appropriate type of analysis. Like when we were talking about our first one, I was talking about it would make a lot of sense to do this as a hierarchical regression where you can do this and this and this. The way they're doing it doesn't make sense, but that's not super well known. But there are other cases where, let's say, this makes a lot of sense as a correlation. Like I'm looking at the relationship between, say, age and cholesterol. A correlation makes a lot of sense there. But sometimes people will go and say, well, I don't want to do it that way. I want to split it into, like, I'm going to make it a t test. I'm going to say it's not how many years old you are. I'm changing age to are you above or below 50 or something like that. You're doing a type of test that is losing a lot of information, and you can't trust the results as much because you've just tossed out a whole bunch of information by changing like how many years old somebody is to just are they above or below this certain age. And there's a lot of cases like this where people will want to do a simpler test that is actually going to give them less reliable results because it doesn't fit with the type of data they're using.
I remember the example that I had in mind.
Yeah. Mhm.
So this is close to like not. I mean, the thing is that if you don't know what statistical test you should use, you should just ask someone smarter than you. Like in biology, there are people called biostatisticians, so just talk to one, right? Your
Mhm.
department, your university probably has somebody on staff who will be happy to help you with your stats, and if they don't, that sucks. But they
Yep.
probably do. They probably have a lab or a shared resource where you can ask experts how to do your statistics. Because guess what? Universities are invested in making sure that nobody cancels them for bad research, right? So they are
Yep.
invested in making sure you are not publishing garbage. So if you're not sure about what statistical test you should use, just ask somebody, and if that makes your effect go away, tough nuts, right? That's just and so the most egregious version of this in my personal study is in neurobiology, where I studied a lot of synapse stuff, like studying the effects of
Mhm.
certain proteins on synapses and how many synapses a neuron has, et cetera, et cetera. And there were papers that would count each synapse as an N, which means that you would have these papers with like again, the large effect size, the large n problem that Myelin was talking about, you would have papers where the n's were like in the thousands because every single synapse counted as an n, when in reality all those synapses have a major covariable that you should account for, and is that they belong to the same neurons. So instead of measuring neurons, which would have reduced their n to like 20 maybe, they were having n's in the thousands. And of course, as Myelin said, if your sample size is big enough, any difference you observe is going to be statistically significant but not meaningful, right? So yeah, really bad stuff.
Oh man.
And you'll never be able to tell if they did that on purpose or not. But if you're not sure, just ask somebody.
Yeah, you're reminding me of all that stuff in neuroscience that works with voxels, where they're like doing hundreds of thousands of correlations without correcting at all for type 1 error, and I'm just dying inside.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that everybody has to be a stats expert, because you get enough in your graduate school learning about how the body works and how biology works. And if they don't give you a stats class, then, you know, you're just not expected to be at that level.
Yeah.
But you should ask someone who is, and then you should help propagate that knowledge in the future, right? Like science is a lot of like helping each other out with because it's hard, right? Again, no man is an island. You can't read all the papers yourself. You got to trust somebody at some point.
Exactly, yeah, and like you aren't always aware of what you don't know. So even if you think you know the right thing to do, it's probably good to ask somebody more experienced. Like I do this all the time. I constantly am consulting with people who know more about stats than me and design than me, because you don't know what you don't know until you check.
Yeah, and that's why I asked Saikin about his input on cholesterol. I asked Myelin to help me with statistics. It's very normal to help and to ask for help when it comes to things that you don't know in science. Okay. Next up here, we have data manipulation and p hacking. So I'm guessing we both have interesting stories to tell here. Why don't you go first?
I'm not going to tell any individual stories because, you know, I don't want to feed into the feeding pool of sharks. But you can make data, like some people have been saying this in chat already, but like if you know your way around stats, you can, I feel like inappropriate analysis can easily be explained as just ignorance. And that's understandable. Data manipulation and p hacking, if you know your way around statistics, you can make data say almost anything that you want it to. I can do all kinds of things to data to find whatever effect I want, you know? I'm not going to get into specifics, but yeah, this is just straight up like you're still using real data from real people. Like you're not making up the numbers. You're using real numbers, but you are intentionally doing things to how you analyze the data that can get you whatever results.
Yeah, exactly. Very artificial ways of treating your data that are not legitimate. And here, like in biology, for example, an example of data manipulation would be to non-linearly turn up your contrast on a certain image, which you can do by accident. So it's a little different than inappropriate analysis where like you just don't know enough stats. But like the presentation of, say, a fluorescent image, say you have a neuron that's been stained, like you get taught in graduate school how to appropriately treat that image so that you are not manipulating your data. So this is still like more forgivable than data falsification, because that's just, you are lying. Data manipulation can happen on purpose, as Myelin has said. Like if you are a stats wizard, you can make anything say anything, but it can also still happen by accident. If you turn up the contrast on an image inappropriately, if you turn up the brightness on an image inappropriately, you can cause the reader of your paper to take a message away from your data that are not reflected in the raw pixel values, right? If you are making your image look cleaner by removing some pixels, you are manipulating your data, right? You are removing data. And this happens, unfortunately, this has happened quite a bit in biology. It's not like a huge problem, right? Like people take any like criticism of science, like, oh, it's all BS. It's not, right?
Yeah.
There are isolated cases where there were Western blots that were cleaned up that were inappropriate, right? Because on a Western blot, you want that one clean band. Additional bands make it look like your purification was messy or your antibody was bad, and people, you know, well, I don't know if they did it on purpose, but if you remove that, then you are manipulating your data. It could be by accident, it could be on purpose. But Like it's never acceptable or forgivable. You just it would never occur to me to even remove a band from a Western blot, right? Like I think you would have to be real silly to do this by accident, which is why I rank it so low.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
I have heard a lot of stories of people being pressured to do this by like graduate advisors and stuff like that, which does muddy the waters a bit. But somebody in the equation is doing something that is very intentionally
yeah,
unethical.
exactly. And yeah, those stories that I've also heard, some of those stories, again, isolated cases. It's not like
Isolated cases.
isolated
Yeah.
cases, not super prominent, of people higher up pressuring their students to clean up their data in unethical ways. But those advisors belong in research hell. So
Yes, they do. They do. And yeah, like cannot emphasize enough, isolated cases, one or two bad actors. The vast majority of people are not like this.
yeah, exactly. And then finally, we have data falsification, which that's real bad, and it has had major implications for multiple fields. In biology, most notably, Alzheimer's research is scarred due to data falsification, just flat up making stuff up. There is a very famous story of someone making it their life's mission to prove that a lot of images in the Alzheimer's research were doctored, like using Photoshop analysis to see that there were patches of neurons that would have been copy and pasted between images, changing values in your spreadsheets, not keeping a tight lab notebook where you keep a physical record of your data. These are things that are like, this is Satan level. This is like never sympathetic, I should say. Like the things that are bad, right? Data manipulation, you still get punished very severely, but you can have instances like if you are being pressured by a PI to clean up your data unethically, there's a sympathetic angle, but just straight up putting in the numbers that are not the numbers you collected, data falsification, copying and pasting neurons that look good across your different conditions, data falsification that's just making stuff up, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, never sympathetic, and is the bottom level of hell. I don't know if you have any stories that you can share or thoughts on that.
There are some famous people who have been caught in psychology. Like, I cannot emphasize enough how vanishingly rare this is, because like not only is it really horrible thing to do, it's a very silly thing to do, because there are a lot of ways to catch fabricated data. Like it's not that hard to pick this up. Real data is messy, and it's very hard to replicate that artificially. But Diedrich Stoppel is like the big guy who fabricated data, and I'm not super familiar with it, but I believe he said he was going to collect a lot of data from a whole bunch of schools and stuff like that, and he just didn't. He never actually collected the data, said he did, and there's solid evidence, and he has confessed, which is why I feel comfortable saying this, that he fabricated data for possibly as many as 30 publications. Like, and he's had 58 different papers retracted. Like, it's bad. But very, very rare. Does happen, but really rare.
Yeah, I mean, if we talk about large ends and significance, right? You have large enough ends of any person, and you will have the occasional phenotype of person that would falsify data, right? It's just law of large numbers.
Yeah.
I really love Yan Yan's comment of, if there's a research hell, who are the research demons punishing the sinners? That is a teaser, I think, for a future stream where we we talk about what these circles of research hell actually look like.
Oh, I would love that. And I can already think of some people. Yeah,
because in Dante's Inferno, right, they meet a bunch of historic figures that Dante believed belonged in these circles of hell, and so I'm sure we can think of papers that we would throw into these circles, but also like Dante's Inferno has the whole like ironic punishment thing happening in the 9 circles, and I think it'd be really fun to design punishments for each of these things, like the data falsification, getting an evil punishment. I think it'd be a lot of fun. Or people Dante hated IRL. Yeah, it's so true.
That too.
I don't know, Myelin, how much do you know about Dante's Inferno?
I know a little bit about it, not a whole lot. I have a friend who's like super into it, but the main thing that I care about right now is that they have Dante from Dante's Inferno on Right Up and Fate Grand Order JP edition, and I haven't rolled him yet, and I'm sad.
I hope that you roll him then.
Thank you, I hope so too.
I love Dante's Inferno because it's like the earliest form of fan fiction I've ever seen in my life.
Oh, I have heard that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so great. Just being like, I hated this guy, so this Pope's in hell. Like,
Also, this guy's cool, so I'm gonna go on an adventure through hell with
yeah,
him.
I love this guy. He's my best friend. Like, also, Minotaurs. I love Minotaurs. Let's just put Minotaurs in one of the circles of hell, like borrowing from a completely different cultural background. It's just so awesome. Dante's Inferno is awesome.
I really need to read it someday. It seems so entertaining.
I don't know that it's worth because I'm not like an English like literature guy, so like I don't really get any joy from reading Dante's Inferno. But like Dante's Inferno video essays, I'm all about that.
Just as a concept, it seems delightful. I'm gonna roll for Dante right now. I'm sorry.
Let's do it live.
I won't let it affect anything. Oh,
Let's do it live.
I told myself I wouldn't, but oh. I can't do it live though because I'm not showing you my phone.
That's true, but you can just be on it. We'll trust you. We'll trust you.
Okay.
You have not had a track record of falsifying data, so there's no reason
I will
to not trust you.
falsify this data. OMG, live gotcha roll stream. It's true.
Do you want to
It's
put
true.
the speaker on so we can hear the noise of the gotcha? Silence.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying. It's there. It's fine. I just rolled Caesar. We're okay.
Okay, darn.
No, Caesar. No, let's see. I'll skip. It's fine. I'll skip ahead to see if I get anything good.
All right, let's see. Are we gonna roll for Dante here? Come on, let's go. Oh no, we should not go because there's desire sensor, right? So
Yeah, the desire sensor.
I actually don't
Isn't
want
Caesar
Dante.
in hell? I don't know actually.
I don't remember. I think Caesar was in hell. I can't quite remember. I was obsessed with Dante's Inferno as a kid though. And all the Dante's Inferno's games I would really like playing. I've even based a D&D campaign off of Dante's Inferno.
I didn't get him.
Oh, that's tragic.
It's okay. I have plenty of in-game currency. I just don't want to spend it.
Fair enough. You are withholding delaying gratification like the
I might have to delay it till the next time that he's on Right Up, which could be years from now.
Dante's Inferno games. Yeah, there are a lot of games that take the same approach of like you play as Dante and you travel through hell to save your loved one. Although that's not really what happened in the original Dante's Inferno. That's kind of what the games have been about. But just like seeing depictions of hell, I think has always been a very fun like fantasy world to live in. Not to live in, but to play in rather, right? Don't want to actually go to hell. I know Dante and Devil May Cry, but I think it's naming as a coincidence. Yeah, if you search for Dante's Inferno games, you should be able to find one. I didn't play them, but I would have loved to.
Maybe on stream.
No.
I wonder if we could find one that's really old and we could mod it into the research hell.
That would be really funny. Yeah, and like Over the Garden Wall is also heavily influenced by Dante's Inferno, and just like I just love seeing people's interpretation of what the bad place looks like for sinners, and to be able to make our own research hell, I think is really funny.
Oh,
yeah,
fun time.
So we are now in the end of the stream. Yeah, that's my last slide.
Oh boy.
Let me see if I can end on just have like a thing up. Yeah, it's probably this slide. The slide that just tells you if you drink more than 3 drinks a day, you barely change your cholesterol and also you become an alcoholic. So now I think we just take questions from chat about the paper or anything like that we've talked about meta science wise, considering we do have in our company right now you would describe yourself as a meta scientist? Or
reformed meta-scientist.
Reformed meta-scientist.
No, more like a retired meta-scientist. I haven't done meta-science in a while, but yeah, I've published in there.
Yeah, because it was also interesting, just like having a conversation with you is always so enlightening, just because I have a very siloed view of how my own science operates and learning about what other people think about when it comes to even this list of like the research hell. I was like, oh, like for me everything stats related just gets lumped into you did the wrong statistical test. I hadn't realized that there were other layers to that kind of idea.
Oh yeah. I really well, I like talking with you too, because you have like it's a completely different perspective and it's really changed how I see a lot of things about stats and research design. It's neat.
I was also talking to other biologists who are not molecular in nature, and I was
Mhm.
like, with that as a secret, there's a collab on the
Ooh.
calendar that I'm keeping secret just in case like things don't shake out. But like, it's another biologist who is a very different type of biologist than what I do, and talking with them, I was like, damn, even though we're both biologists, we see the world in completely different ways. Because down to the choice to specialize in what we specialize in already, I think, determines some kind of difference in uh how we take our approach to uncovering truth about the world, which I know I've talked to you about this to some extent too, but I always think it's kind of interesting to revisit the idea of like why you chose to go in the field that you chose, whether or not it was the content or the approach. And I was talking to them because they are more in the animal territory, and I was like, "Do animals are like
Mm.
so complicated?" I look at an animal, I'm like, "You are a lot of cells, and I can't name every cell in your body, and therefore you are too complicated for me."
Oh, that's fair. It is interesting. It makes me kind of sad that like a lot of media lumps scientists together as just like you're a scientist, so you can do everything or whatever. But like the amount of variation, even within like the same discipline, is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, it's also like there's so many assumptions that we make about each other too, that I
Yes, that
think
too.
that is like it's like so eye-opening, because I was talking to the animal scientist and I was like, how about we do this animal? Surely you know of this animal. It's one of the most important animals in molecular biology and one of the animals that you could have been studying. And they were like, no, I actually know very little about that animal and I find them to be quite boring. And I was like, oh, I just did the thing where I'm like, oh, you're an animal biologist, name every animal. Like,
Yeah, right.
it's like I was just guilty of that sin, even though we're both biologists and I should really know better. It's just that sometimes you don't think about that kind of stuff because we don't really talk to each other.
It's so interesting.
Especially
Ah.
like my only exposure to people who are not in my same degree program. Oh, by the way, Myelin, if you have to go at any time, you'll feel free to cut in or whatever. But
Oh, I think I'm all right. I think. I hope. If there's anything going on, I'm not aware of it.
okay, cool. But yeah, like the only context that I would talk to people in my graduate program that were not in my program but like other graduate students was when I was teaching, because we all had we shared the same teaching program. So there I got to talk to like English graduate students and history graduate students, and like my favorite conversations from graduate school have often just been like, so what do you like do, like what was up with Caesar or whatever. Like, oh, you study like the path that this Mongolian tribe had taken during this catastrophic weather event or something. Like hearing about those things is like, damn, like I like truly know so little beyond my own expertise, and having conversations with other people have been really, really fun.
Mhm. Sorry, I'm looking at Yan, the question of what's a good blend of psych and bio together? Neuroscience, right?
It depends on the type of work that you want to do.
Also true.
Do you want to work with patients? And think of this very seriously, because Rico is here and Rico can actually tell you about what it's like to work with patients. I
Mhm.
prefer to look at text and read and make PowerPoint slides. I don't want to talk to patients. Okay, Ganyan, so you understand that you do not want to work with
Yeah.
patients.
Good to know. Good to know.
Yeah, so then psychiatry, not it, right?
Mhm.
Neuroscience, potentially. Like, the thing is that you gotta pick a lane, like a primary focus between psychology and biology with regards to which approach you enjoy more, because you're always going to lose out on the other half. As a neurobiologist myself, right,
Mhm.
do I have psychology background? Actually, no. Like, I mean, I remember Freud like from
Oh,
school, right?
please, that's something you can forget. That's fine.
Yeah, like I remember that Freud was important for the history of psychology. I remember that operant conditioning is a thing. right?
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of as a neurobiologist, what mattered to me was behavior.
Yeah.
Um, and a mouse's behavior does not always equate to the relevant things that you want to think about in psychology. So, do you want to work with people specific experiences or stuff that all animals share in common? So, as someone who worked with mice, I worked a lot with brain injury and thinking about the factors that go into whether or not a mouse can recover from a brain injury. So, it doesn't have to be human. Mouse's got a brain and it's got legs and you got legs, right? So it doesn't have to be a human. But if you like thinking about humans, then you probably should lean more into psychology rather than biology.
Yeah, there's behavioral neuroscience, which is technically falls under psychology under a lot of things, but that also works with mice and rats, but biopsych. And I think behavioral neuroscience can also include humans as well.
Yeah, neuroscience scares me too, honestly. That's why I describe myself as a neurobiologist. I studied the biology of neurons. Neuroscientists, they got to do a lot of programming, they got to think about networks. I think it's also why, you can, even though my background is in neuroscience, right, or neurobiology,
Mhm.
if you check my channel, what are my most popular videos? It's pathogens. It's, streams about rabies or tuberculosis. Even though my background is in the brain's pretty hard to understand, right? Like, and
Mhm.
so if you're not comfortable with programming, I think, like, even the problem is that these days I think behavioral neuroscience is also getting quite computational. Um,
Good. They were doing their stats bad before. I mean,
neuroscience is fun. It is fun. I think a
yeah.
lot of the ideas in neuroscience are a lot of fun. It's just if you want to do it professionally, you got to be like good at it.
Yeah. Well, a lot of psychology these days, at least in terms of doing the statistics, involves programming. So, sorry if you
Yeah,
want to go into psych related things or a lot of just generally related things like
yeah,
science stuff that involves stats, you're going to be doing. Yeah.
exactly,
I program
exactly.
in R, but Python is also useful. Yeah.
I programmed a tiny bit, but not very much at all. Cell bio scares me as an engineer, honestly. Like, can you make an analytical model of a bunch of cells with differential equations? Absolutely. That's all cell biology. Within the cell is just so many flow charts of reactants and products and stuff like that. You can model physical forces within the cell. If you like thinking about mechanics, right? So kinesin enacts a force when it pulls on a microtubule, right? A membrane tugs on the surface that it's moving across if you are a crawling creature, crawling cell, I should say. So if you like engineering, cell biology is genuinely like a very good fit for someone with engineering background because so much of cell biology is math, unfortunately.
hmm
uh,
Everything's math when you get down to it. Everything is some combination of math and philosophy, in my
yeah.
experience.
I just want to point out another comment about recombinant. So I do have a rule in chat that is not posted that I should really update it, but I don't actually allow talking down on yourself, even as a joke, because you can normalize the feeling of thinking that you're dumb, and I really don't like that. As someone that has had like very serious self-esteem issues with regards to intelligence, even joking that you're dumb, even if you in the moment think that you're joking, saying those words out loud and hearing it is not good for you. So
Mm.
try not to do that, even is it in a joking way. If you're in a Find the Neutral stream, you are at the very least curious and patient enough to sit through streams like this. And if you enjoy my content and V theorem content in general, you at least have that curiosity, willingness to learn all things that are more important than this construct that I hate, which is intelligence, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm very anti the idea of intelligence.
Mhm. Mhm. No, I agree. It's silly.
I don't think intelligence is a useful metric for most people. If you're like a school psychologist and you need to use intelligence as a metric to help students adjust to a learning environment, sure, that's one niche scenario where I consider intelligence to be somewhat useful. But for most other people, is I could name 1,000 other things that are more important to whether or not you can learn than this vague notion of intelligence.
Mhm. Interest will take you a long way.
interest, discipline, passion,
Yeah.
rigor, not giving up. Like, I think in terms of if you want like we were just talking about anime before we went live. Like, I think if you want like an actual academic role model in anime, dude, Rock Lee
Oh my
from
gosh,
Naruto,
yes. Absolutely.
the ability to chase after your ideals and your dreams without giving up is much more important than how fast you can learn something. Because, like, and I said this again, but it's always worth saying every time it comes up. But, like, I have a working memory of like 5 items. I don't have a learning disability, right? But in terms of like comparing myself to my peers who were much faster learning biology than I was, right? I was like low pack in high school because I went to a high school for nerdy geniuses, and then in graduate school I was more middle of the pack, but I still struggled a lot. And it just felt like my peers were always like learning at a rate that I could never catch up with. Like, I remember, and I told the story before, but just real quick again. We were commiserating about how hard these biology papers were to read because it was my first time reading a lot of current literature, and yeah, they were like, "Dude, I spent a whole 2 hours on that paper," and I was like, "You spent 2 hours on that paper?" Dude, I spent 8 hours. I spent all day yesterday reading that one paper because by the time I finished a sentence, I would have forgotten the first half of it. And so, like, it took a lot of therapy to be like, it's okay, I'm just slower. That doesn't mean I'm dumb. It just means it takes me a bit longer. That's fine. Rock Lee over Goku. Goku, no. Goku is an alien.
Rock Lee had real determination, and he had what others would consider limitations, but he didn't let that get him down. He went on. He found his own ways of succeeding, and he worked his butt off, and he was great.
Yeah, and Goku is an alien freak. So, like,
Yeah. Why? But
yeah,
there were training arcs in Dragon Ball, if I remember correctly, but they don't hit nearly as hard. You know, it wasn't like this overcoming like society's expectations of you. Goku is just like it's different. It's different.
yeah. Like, if every time you nearly died, you got a power up. Like, I mean, I don't know. It's not. I don't think Goku as compelling as Rock Lee is. That's my
Hmm.
hot anime take right there. Just like
Yeah.
a guy who, you show up to train every day because Rock Lee, because okay, so there's a bit of a tangent, but like the word kung fu, right? Like originates from this idea of discipline. Like, if you do the meme of like punching a heavy bag every day, or like like shoving your fist into sand, if you pound sand every day, eventually your hands become like rocks, right? Like, the
Hmm.
the obsession with self-improvement, and progress, one could argue that that's not very healthy, but in terms of like as a role model for staying in the game and working hard, like, the idea of kung fu is that you work at it every day. It's not actually like principled in self-defense. It's just like it happened to form into self-defense, but like the original concept was like you do one thing every day, you're going to be amazing at it. And that's often what you have to do to succeed no matter where you are, like not even in academia. Whereas Goku is
Yeah.
just like, I guess I'll just almost die or die and then come back better. I'm like, I don't know, I
Hmm.
can't really get into that.
Yeah. It didn't really feel earned, and I think part of it is just the overcoming expectations for yourself. I don't think Goku ever doubted that he could become super strong. Maybe there was like token stuff, but didn't really hit. Like everybody was telling Rock Lee, like, you cannot do this, and Rock Lee was like, screw you, I'm just gonna try really hard.
Yeah, and like Vegeta, I think is a more compelling story arc in Dragon Ball as well, just because like he has this like huge ego, this like character flaw, that he has to overcome, and like his as a kid, I didn't really like Vegeta. As an adult, I'm like, oh, the like self. The ego that he has, and the jealousy, and the feeling that he should be better, all combined into one character, makes for a much more compelling character. We were actually, this is so interesting because Myla and I were just talking about how like main characters in anime, I feel like, are not very compelling.
Hmm.
Like everybody tolerates the main characters. I don't know how many people love the main characters in anime. The
Like,
glorious powers fight, exactly. Yeah.
yeah, we were talking about like how many people have like a Naruto eat a bag or something like that. Like, who out there is like super simping for I don't know.
Actually, that's true. Like Luffy is pretty popular, I feel.
Luffy is fairly popular. I'd say Goku's also pretty popular, but I don't know if Goku's popular for his personality so much as what he represents.
I wonder how many people love Goku versus how many people love Vegeta. The depth of their appreciation versus just a general likeness to it. Maybe we'll do data
There's like
collection.
I would love to collect some data and analyze some data on this. Yeah, Saitama was actually one of the ones I was thinking of while I was talking with Fi of like a main character who actually is the most popular character in the series that he's from that I can think of.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's also like, but like Saitama's got a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's got his thing. I will forever say like it makes a character that feels that is kind of pathetic is more compelling than a character who's like, I'm gonna be the very best that no one ever was.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think Ash Ketchum is perfect. Not to say like, I grew up in the Pokemon anime. I've heard that the Pokemon anime is quite good. And I think that like Ash in the later seasons, I haven't watched them, so I'm not qualified to say anything about those. But like Ash is simultaneously like up until like the championships, I think very vanilla. But the thing is that Ash loses so often. And I think that's a really interesting choice. I was actually just talking bad about Ash to Myelin beforehand because I'm like, whose favorite character is Ash from Pokemon? Like in the Pokemon series, are you collecting Ash merch? Like I don't. I mean, like of the human characters, is Ash your favorite character? In retrospect, because Ash gets his ass handed to him so often in the series, maybe I do like Ash more than I realize.
Could be, could be. I think that does like help his likability a bit, for sure.
We do have a question regarding
yeah.
back to the science. Joel asks a question on covariables. If you want to tackle that one.
Oh, that's where interactions come out. So okay, so the question was, I get a question regarding covariables. I get how they can cancel out two variables, but how do you handle the interplay of more than two variables? So there's a bunch of different ways I can think about this. When you think about all the difference, so statistics is all about explaining differences between people or differences between observations, like why are these two scores different and then stuff like that. When you're controlling for things with covariables or things like that, that's just like how much does each variable take up of the pie. So like once height has taken its share, how much does age get? How much does this and this and this? And like that can scale to like an infinite number theoretically of covariables, or covariates as we call them in psychology. So you can have however many you want, but like there's also interactions. And so covariables are just like how much does this thing take on its own? And it's kind of ignoring like what other variables do. It's like with however much of the pie is left, how much does this variable get? But you can also look at how variables work together, and that's interactions. That's like, okay, let's say, oh god, this is such a stupid example that no one will get. So, I don't know if anyone here has ever seen the anime Bento. Have you heard of this fight?
That is niche. I have no idea what you're talking about right now.
Oh, it's so good. It's a show about Japanese high schoolers who are on budgets, but they want convenience store food. They want to go to the konbini and get some food. So at like 6 p.m. or whatever, the konbini puts discounts on all their food because it's like how bakeries lower prices at the end of the day. And so they all fight each other to get the food with the discount. It's a fighting anime where they fight to get discount konbini food. We're thinking about like interactions are kind of like covariates on their own is just like how much can this person get the bento, or how much food can this person get on their own? An interaction is like if these two people are teaming up and fighting together, how much can they get? And sometimes that means your partner's dragging you down, and when like this would normally get the thing, they wouldn't with that partner because they're teamed up. Other times, like if two people are working together, they can get all the food together. This is a horrible metaphor.
You're lost in your own sauce.
I'm lost in my. This happens all the time to me. But yeah, covariables are just like saying how much does this thing get on its own. But interactions are like when these two things are together, what do they do that they wouldn't do separately? And sometimes that means one of them cancels the other out. Sometimes that means one of them weakens the other. Sometimes one amplifies the other. Sometimes they do something entirely new together that they wouldn't have separately. But that's variance on top of the variance that they explain on their own.
Oh,
yeah.
One thing that I wanted to mention, Rico, if you wanted to drop a link to your Twitch in the chat, I'd be very happy for you to do so. I don't know if you're still around, Rico. But I also wanted to point out, Mori says that the target audience of shonen manga probably like the main character best. When you're young, you like Goku. As you get older and wiser, Vegeta is more compelling. I really want to see at what age that shift happens, because I think that's definitely true of like when I was like 8 maybe, but I think when I started to have like a sense of like starting to have a sense of self, I don't think that was true after that, for me personally, right? Because when I'm thinking about like Naruto, I don't like Naruto, but I like Rock Lee a lot, and my favorite character as a kid was Shikamaru because I was so jealous that he was so smart. I like wanted to be him, right? So I'm wondering, I think Mori is right, but I'm wondering if we could get that data of like who was your childhood favorite and who is your favorite now, and what that breakdown kind of looks like, to see like
that would be I mean, if we want to get it on like a bigger level, we could look at popularity polls for shonen versus seinen magazines, because shonen are aimed at younger ages, seinen are aimed at older ages, and we could see is the main character ranking higher in seinen than in shonen, or vice versa, or something like that, which wouldn't really get at the age thing, but it would at least get at like, do the main characters seem more compelling to the audience for one demographic than the other?
Yeah.
That's a different question.
It is.
I want data. I want all of it.
And this is like very much like kind of in your wheelhouse, so I will.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm curious to see what it might happen.
Yeah, another thing to add to the great big list. We created just the conversation with Fi before the stream. I have a giant list of potential future video and stream ideas, and it's disgusting. Do character preferences change for the same series? The same series change over the lifespan. Yeah. Shonen. The audiences for shonen manga in Japan and the US do seem pretty different. Sorry.
I'd also wonder what characteristics of the viewer are correlated with who they find to be their favorite character in this kind of shift, right? Like, what about me says that my favorite Naruto character as a kid was Shikamaru? What about me now says my favorite character is now Rock Lee? I think those things are also really interesting. I don't know if you could do like big data on that though, because that's so personal, right? I think if I were to just,
you could, but you just have to identify the right variables, which is the big pain.
That makes you the research scientist on this, because I can't. I'm not clever enough to design something like that. That's because like I think for me again, like that idealistic like, oh, Shikamaru, because I rewatched Naruto because Toxo wanted to rewatch it, and I came away with the feeling like the character that I find myself emotionally resonating with is Rock Lee. But like as a kid, I idolized Shikamaru. So the switch between idolization into resonating, right? Which I think is, I wonder if younger people do more of the idolizing and older people do more resonating.
Yeah, I wonder. I'm thinking of it as in terms of like aspirational versus relatability.
Not to say, I'm just kind of making the assumption that older people have fewer aspirations, which is maybe a little rude, but I think it is also aspirational, you know, like my appreciation of Rock Lee, but Rock Lee has a more attainable aspiration, right? Like,
yeah,
waking up and working hard is attainable.
Hmm.
Shikamaru's genius level intellect is not attainable. It's just
Yeah.
a neat thing he can do.
Hmm. I guess I was projecting myself onto you because I feel like when I was a kid, I just liked the cool, edgy characters because I thought they were cool and I wanted to be cool too. But now I like the characters who are really just worn out, beaten down, tired, haven't slept in weeks.
Yeah, no, I feel that. Actually, this morning, Toxo sent me a picture of a bunch of cute mascots and asked me which one I thought was their favorite. And I guessed correctly that it's this like grimacing toast man.
Oh,
I think the types of aspirations are different. Yeah, yeah.
that could be.
It could be.
Yeah.
Um, but I wonder like how prevalent like these connections, these parasocial relationships. I don't know if that's really correct to say,
Mhm.
but like what the character of these parasocial relationships are, like, and how they shift with time as people age would be really fun to take a look at.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe even just general motivations for consuming fiction or like desire what you want to get out of a story.
Especially because like now that I'm thinking about Naruto again, I'm like, as a kid, I really loved Kakashi, and as an
Mhm.
adult, I'm like, dude, you were sleeping on the job.
He's a horrible teacher.
You are sleeping on the job. No matter how cool you are, I'm like, I have your job in the sense where I am also teaching students, and I'm like, I can no longer relate. I do not aspire to be this.
I do. The more you learn about a certain thing, the less you tend to like most fictional portrayals of it, is what I've like. Because you can point out the flaws and stuff like that, but also you can think of like, if I did that, I would be so fired.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's also pretty interesting in the way that like I mean, I don't think I've watched a teacher movie since the really famous one with the God, I can't remember what it's called. Freedom
Exactly.
Writers. Freedom Writers.
Mm.
I don't think I've watched a teacher movie since Freedom Writers, and that was quite a while ago. So it'd be interesting to see how like I'm not like a teacher who teaches at that level, but I'm wondering if I have a different reaction now than I had back then. Um,
I definitely have a lot of reactions to like stories that take place in colleges and universities and stuff. Maury had to suffer through this. Maury recommended me a book that took place ostensibly in a college, and I'm like, this is not a college. This is a boarding high school. Like,
oh, that's interesting. Well, from what perspective was the story told from?
it was stole from one of the students, but still,
Oh man.
just generally, the more you know about something, the easier it is to find flaws, and the harder it is to suspend your disbelief, which is sad. But
That
oh
is
well.
true. I this is like unrelated, but it did make me think about like portrayals of schools like online. And like there are properties out there where there's like bullying happening in college. And while
Mm.
like bullying absolutely does happen in high school, I feel like it was so rare in college that whenever I do watch a movie that has bullying as being a central theme in a college setting, I'm a little like, how common even is this by the time you are this age? It's kind of crazy to me.
Maybe if we went to a much smaller college. Like I know I went to a very big college. I did not know 99% of people around, which I feel makes bullying a lot harder. People have to know you to bully you
That's
to an
true.
extent.
I guess people say that bullying still happens in the workplace. So I guess, unless college is for whatever reason fundamentally different than the workplace. Because, like, from my perspective, like, people who are antisocial in their behavior, I'm using
Mhm.
that in a way where you are literally antisocial, you are not being a good person to other people, tend to get like
Mhm.
corrected out in college where like they ended up like isolated. Like there's a self-correcting mechanism once you get to college, which is why like I think a lot of people are like, oh, if you're bullied in high school, like just make it to college. You should be okay in most cases. Um, and I wonder what other people's experience of bullying was in college. And, feel free to tell me I'm wrong and full of it. Just because I didn't experience bullying obviously doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. It's just that, like, I find it hard to believe that bullying happens in college.
Yeah.
How do you have
Shoving
time to.
people into their lockers in college. We didn't have lockers at my college unless it was
Yeah.
the gym.
Feel like by that point it's harassment. Oh, that's so true. That's so
Yeah, just the
true.
reframing of it. Yeah. I don't know. I just genuinely feel like it's like I think it's because in college, like your classes are you go to class and then you go to class and then you leave. You're not really and also like you're in certain majors, so in high school and workplaces, you're forced to be around a lot of people who are very different from you for extended periods of time, some of which is downtime. That's not like you're not actively engaging in an activity. Whereas in college, you're not forced to be around people who are different from you in cases where you have to interact with them most of the time, you know?
I just remembered something about bullying in college. It absolutely does happen. It's called
Hazing?
it's called hazing. I
Yeah.
I think this is a very American thing, right? Because I feel like other countries don't really, from what I understand, don't really have Greek life.
Oh my gosh. Greek life is the bane of my existence.
Is it really big where you are?
No, but I guess it's not the bane of my existence. I'm just one of those people who identified as a nerd who associated Greek life with the popular kids, you know?
It's actually so interesting in terms of like I find Greek life to be fascinating from a educator perspective because like as a kid I also had that like reaction of these are the people who want to have social capital and a fraternity or a sorority is a good way to accumulate social capital for whatever reasons they may want that. But from an educational point of view, I feel like every student I've had that's come from Greek life has been really excellent, like
Oh, really?
surprisingly really locked in at all times. And I'm forcing myself to in this experience like reassess my perception of Greek life students because they honestly work. And like you could argue that this happens a non-zero amount of time where because they are in Greek like they can have access to like previous tests, previous homeworks, previous quizzes, so maybe that gives them an advantage over other people. But in terms of having conversations with them, it's clear that in conversation they come across as understanding what it is that they are learning. And as AI becomes more and more of a thing, the fact that any student can talk legibly, can like speak
Hmm.
coherent thoughts, I'm like, damn, you're like actually pretty good, actually. I'm very impressed.
Yeah. I have thoughts, but I think what Astrologibuzz is saying, what exactly is Greek life? I don't know. It's how do you even explain? I don't even fully understand it. Fraternities and sororities, so they're groups of people who identify with each other. They do activities together. They may live like if you're big in it, I think they live in a shared house, right? Each fraternity and sorority has its own shared house.
Yeah,
They have a common identity,
so
activities. Sorry.
it might be better to explain sororities and fraternities by referring to their actual name, right? A fraternity is a brotherhood, right?
Mhm.
Fraternal sororities is a sisterhood. So it's basically a group that you there's an initiation process and you are swearing yourself into a shared brotherhood or a shared sisterhood. If it sounds like a cult,
Yeah, that's a really good way of explaining it. I think
I,
that I never thought about it that way, but it seems obvious when you say it that way.
it's not really like a true cult by definition, right? There's no charismatic leader, like so don't like get too hung up
Yeah.
on the usage of the word cult, but it is like a weird thing that I view as somewhat artificial. But in terms of like in my era of like reevaluating my negative opinion on fraternities and sororities, I do have to acknowledge that as we increase our reliance on technology and decrease opportunities for genuine human connection, that having a social structure where you are forced to be social is not necessarily a bad thing. I just think hazing is stupid.
Yeah, when you put it that way, I think yeah, I think that's a good way of thinking about it.
It's
Like most of the way that I think about it is either just they threw all the wild parties and stuff like that. Like that's where the wild parties theoretically happen when you're in college is at the fraternities and sororities. And I've heard a lot about exam sharing and stuff like that, which upsets me. But I guess the one interaction I've had with people in fraternities and sororities at my campus was them asking me to be their faculty advisor. And they were all good students, but I was sitting there like, I'm the least qualified person to know anything about this. I barely even know what you are or what you do.
I would not volunteer to be a faculty advisor for Greek life. I don't want
Yeah,
to be
no.
talked to by authorities.
Yes, definitely not. Oh, they're kind of famous for having lots of like just general. The stereotype is that they're a bunch of like sort of wild party. They do a lot of stupid things, and I don't think that's true. And like the culture from sorority and fraternity from different places can vary wildly, but I
Yes.
wouldn't be surprised if they have systems for getting booze and stuff underage.
So you can't like paint all fraternities and sororities with the same brush, which is why they each have their own reputations, right? There are stereotypes based on which Greek organization you are talking about. So you have fraternities that are sometimes just like community service fraternities where they don't even like drink or anything. They're like a big community service group, which I think is very wholesome. And again, the same principles of brotherhood, like you stick together no matter what. But then that's also like the mentality of like, this is why they're also problematic, because if you have a group of people who have sworn loyalty to each other, when one person does something bad, well, you all sworn a brotherhood oath. What happens then, right? Like it's a very interesting form of socialization that happens on campus, but at the same time I would never join one, but I've known lovely people who have, but I just don't think that that structure is for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like the description of deeply unserious campus cult.
Yeah.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Yeah, absolutely. The undergrad Greek life, when I was an undergrad, I don't know anything about my current institution, but yeah, they had access to alcohol that they weren't supposed to have, right? It's open secret and stuff like that. And as a goody two shoes, again, 0 to 1 drink a month, most of the time it's 0. Just like, I don't want to be in that kind of environment. Although I'm also acknowledging that I'm also not like a party person or an extrovert, so I can see the appeal for people who want that connection.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. I had a lot of fun chatting. I'm glad we got to talk more about that anime thing, considering I feel like we were talking about it in setup, and then I had to be like, oh, we're streaming now.
Yeah, oh no, it's time to stream. Can't talk about anime anymore.
But it's good to talk about anime. I miss watching anime. It's because now it's work.
Well, I have some recommendations for you.
It's not that I have a lack of access on recommendations, is I'm not in the right headspace for anime anymore.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
I think it's tragic because all I do is make content, work, and watch something on a second monitor. And if it's anime, I have to read the subtitles.
Yeah. All Fi does is do work, eat hot chip, and tell science.
Yeah, I don't lie.
You don't lie, you just science. Oh, yes, and science fell in love and they tried to prove it. I think
I love
Apothecary
that
Diaries is one of the ones that I want to get Fi to watch. I really want Fi to watch Apothecary Diaries.
On a personal recommendation for you, I may watch it.
Yes.
But yeah, so I want to talk about scientists fell in love, so they tried to prove it by Whom and Buddy. For those of you who don't know, this is a depiction of a research team. I think they do physics, and it is about
they're information sciences.
Oh, information scientists. My bad.
Yeah. No, you're good.
But it follows their like intra lab like romance between these two senior members of the lab, and then there's like an audience surrogate ish, which is the undergrad. And the undergrad, I think, is like, okay, objectively, I think the anime is pretty mid, but as a scientist watching the show, I think that one of the most important depictions of what it is like to get started in research is the story of this undergraduate. So
yes,
if you ever find yourself with a heaping helping case of imposter syndrome, go watch, I don't remember which episode it is. It's one of the last ones, but in the story,
the one with the conference one?
Yeah, the conference one. It's extremely campy and not at all realistic, but there are some really emotional things that are said in that episode, which again, like, you can hear it from me, so this is spoilers, but like, it's spoilers that I don't think matters, right? The speech that the senior researcher gives the undergraduate is so important for any young scientist to hear, because as we've discussed repeatedly, science is very hard and no man is an island and the stuff is difficult, and you get into this because it's what you like, and it's hard to confront a possible reality in which you are not good enough to do what you like, and that is devastating for anybody to realize. But the thing is that every scientist, unless you are like an egomaniac, every scientist has this moment of like, am I not good enough for this? Like, even me, I say I have a huge ego. I do have a huge ego. I think I'm great. But as a kid, I had this moment where I was like, I don't think I'm good enough to do this. Be a medical doctor. By coincidence, it was true, but in terms of like the feeling of not feeling good enough, this is such a good episode. I don't know if you want to say anything about that, Myelin, because it's very obvious that you've watched this exact episode too.
Oh yeah, no, I think I did a video on the first season. That was one of the first videos I did on my channel. I called it Grad School the Anime because honestly, highly relatable as a social scientist.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but it was episode 10, and honestly, I've gotten very similar talks. Like, whenever I was nervous before a presentation, I would get very similar talks from my advisor and the senior to grad students, so it hit really hard.
Yeah, and I've gotten the pep talk as well. The part of it that's campy is that the senior researcher tells the little undergrad to wear a lab coat when she presents, and I like that's so campy, but I love it. It's like it's a very Japanese anime thing to be like, this lab coat is a symbol of your membership to this lab, and I was like, oh my god, that's so cool. But in reality, like that's so.
They did portray it really campy, and like, of course, social scientist. That's the one criticism I have of that anime in terms of portrayals. We don't wear lab coats as social scientists. Like, there's no point.
Also,
but
if you're in your office space, you should not be wearing your lab coat.
Oh, contamination kind of thing deal? Or?
Yeah, you don't want to have your lab coat in close proximity to a laptop that you type with your hands. Although if they're information scientists, like what like what?
Yeah, exactly. That's why I think it's silly for them to wear lab coats. Like, why do they don't need them? But like, that moment I thought actually really was highly relatable to me, because for a little while the lab I was in grad school had a tradition where there was a spare lab coat in the lab space, and before you defended your master's or your dissertation, you would go in there before anyone else and you'd put on the lab coat and just wear it for a little bit, feeling like, I am a scientist, and that was a thing that we did to sort of hype ourselves up. So I thought that was very relatable.
Yeah, I unironically, that it's like it like brought me to tears, because it's like the same. So I guess we can do this for everyone in the chat if you don't have access to this anime, but if you do, I highly recommend you watch it, because the music and the composition of the shots, it's like very, very, I might rewatch it after we stream, but essentially a lot of what that speech was, and Myelin, you can help me fill in what I'm missing, is that like, so for context, they were at a conference and this undergraduate was giving a talk, which is also like really rare to have an undergraduate give a talk at a conference, like maybe a poster.
Yeah.
It
was like a
common.
training kind of conference. It wasn't like a big conference. It was kind of baby thing.
Gotcha. But she was having these thoughts of self-doubt, like, oh, I'm just an undergraduate and a little pipsqueak, and this is a room of very accomplished scientists that are going to be evaluating what you are saying. And that is a very real fear. And if you don't have that fear, you aren't doing science, right? Like, you should be afraid of talking in a room full of science. You should be appropriately afraid, right? Getting called out on not knowing something should be a terrifying thing, which it motivates you to prepare as well as you can. That is essentially what a thesis defense is.
Sorry, I need to go real fast for a second. I'll be back.
No worries. So in that speech, she's talking herself down. She's like, oh gosh, there's so many world experts here in my field, and I'm worried that I'm going to get something wrong, and they're going to all realize that I'm just like dumb and I don't deserve anything that I've gotten, and I don't deserve to be here. And these thoughts are, in some ways, they are rational in the sense that you have reasons to believe them, right? If you are an undergraduate, you've only had a couple years to garner any level of expertise, whereas a graduate student has had half a decade more on you, a postdoc has had a decade on you, and your professors have had multiple stages of life on top of you in terms of their ability to garner expertise. However, something that every undergraduate needs to hear is that there are more problems that exist in the world than there are people fixing those problems, right? And so the idea here is that if you have a situation where you are about to be evaluated for your expertise, then what you have to realize is that in that moment that you are about to speak, you are the world's expert on your particular problem, right? No one has worked on your exact problem than anyone else, right? Everyone else might be very accomplished in their own field, but again, because there are way more problems than there are solutions out there, if you have worked your butt off, there is actually no way that any of those other experts know enough about your problem to know more than you. Now, if you try to venture out of your very narrow field of expertise, then you could get caught out on. But as long as you've done enough reading in your own problem, you are the world's expert. And I think that's a very empowering kind of feeling that in science, again, I mentioned this on a different stream. Oh, no. I actually mentioned this in the Discord, that if you choose to go down the path of hyperspecialization, you will have many experiences where you might be the only person in the world to have a piece of information that no one else has ever thought of. And that is very special. And that is why I love, academia so much, right? The fact is that if you choose to be a researcher, there's a very real world where you will be the only person in a world full of in a world of 1.8, 1.7 billion other people, you have something that literally nobody else has. And that is this specific result from this specific project that no one in the world knows about. And I think that's very special. And I think that is something that you should guard with the appropriate level of anxiety. Right? I don't know, Myelin, how much you caught of that, but does my recollection kind of match up with what you remember about that episode?
Yeah, I mean, that's the main thing I remember, because I hope every grad student has had the talk of like, at this point where you've done this much work, you are the world expert on this topic. No one in this room knows more than you
Isn't that
on that
crazy?
specific thing. Yeah, it's wild. And that's honestly my favorite part of doing research and why I love statistics so much. That thing you mentioned about being the only person in the world to have a certain bit of information. That's the coolest part about statistics. If you're the one doing the analysis, you are the first person in the entire world to know that. And it's just so cool.
And you can
So
do
happy.
this by the age of 23.
Yes.
Like, if you propose your thesis defense topic, right? In that moment, the problem that you picked, hopefully nobody else is working on it, although you'll never know. You might get scooped. That's just reality. But there is a non-zero chance that after you defend your thesis proposal, that by the age of 23, you have had a new idea that no one else has ever successfully tested, assuming you did enough research into what other people have done. At 23, you can have something that no one else in the world has, and I think that's amazing.
So freaking cool. So cool.
So cool. All right. I think that's a pretty optimistic and wonderful note to end the stream on. Myelin, do you have anything that you would like to plug before we head off?
I wish I did.
Don't you have a stream tomorrow?
I guess, yeah. I haven't officialized it yet, but we're gonna finish reading this paper. We're reading a paper on moral licensing in buying things, and we just got to the results section, and boy, it's gonna be an interesting ride. I get to talk more about statistics and the pitfalls thereof.
That sounds very exciting. When are you streaming that? What time?
Probably 7:30 p.m. Eastern.
Gotcha. Thank you so much. Alrighty. So we will I will try to make that. I think I missed the beginning of it though, which is kind of unfortunate. But if you like more of this, like tearing into a paper and really analyzing what these magic science words mean, Myelin streams have also been quite excellent and in a different field than mine. So if you're bored about talking about cells, we can hear more about how people just exist, and people are complicated and they're terrible, which is why I didn't become a psychologist, but they are interesting. And so it's nice to reap the fruits of the labor of the psychologist without having to do the work. So it's been a lot of fun. Alrighty. So, all right. goodbye, y'all. Very fun chatting with all of you. Hope you learned something new about how to read research papers, and I will see you at some point in the future. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.